Chapter 84. Because Xiao Su had a habit of going to Chu Qingyan's room after coming back from the study every time it happened to be mealtime, so the kitchen was set up in her room. This time, Huang Yi had people bring the dishes and chopsticks over as usual. And because Chu Qingyan's foot was injured, Huang Yi specially prepared a small table for her on the bed to make it convenient for her to eat. Because Chu Qingyan's leg was injured, Huang Yi's idea was to nourish her body with whatever she ate. Therefore, she would always serve Chu Qingyan braised pork trotters, steamed duck's feet, honey chicken drumsticks, and other animal limbs. Furthermore, she would always use the same ingredients, but she would always cook them in different ways. Her culinary skills were good, and Chu Qingyan would always enjoy her food. However, if she ate too much, there would be a time when she got tired of it. So now Chu Qingyan's eyes drifted to the dishes on the other table. Crispy prawns, spicy chicken, tofu with clams. Once she saw them, Chu Qingyan couldn't move her eyes away. And a certain someone was eating leisurely, not at all noticing her envious gaze. In fact, how could Xiao Su not notice such a bright gaze? But he didn't want to pay attention to it. The more she looked at the dishes, the more Chu Qingyan felt that her food was tasteless. Finally, she couldn't help but open her mouth. "Your Highness, my pork trotters are very delicious. Do you want to try?" She threw a brick to attract Jade. "No need," Xiao Su said without turning his head.
Oh.
Her first move was to exchange something. If he said he wanted to try, she could take the opportunity to say that politeness demands reciprocity and use his crispy prawns to exchange. Unfortunately, it failed. "Your Highness, that spicy chicken of yours smells, and looks very delicious." She beat around the bush. "It's okay." Xiao Su picked up a piece of spicy chicken, paused, and then indifferently replied.
"Oh."
Chu Qingyan gritted her teeth. At this time, shouldn't he be a gentleman and let her have a taste? The second move failed. Just as Chu Qingyan was racking her brains to think of the third move, Xiao Su's cold words floated over. "If you want it, just say it." Chu Qingyan raised her head subconsciously. Wouldn't it be too embarrassing to say it directly? Chinese men and women were particular about being tactful. But the next sentence came again. "But this prince will not agree." Xiao Su looked at her coldly before lowering his head to continue eating. Chu Qingyan's eyes, which were originally filled with surprise and anticipation, suddenly turned into resentment. "This lord, are you telling a cold joke? What's the point of teasing people like this? Damn it. Cheapskate, drink cold water." Chu Qingyan angrily took a bite of the drumstick and muttered in her heart, "You won't even give me a shrimp." Hearing the sound of bones being chewed, Xiao Su's mood was inexplicably good. He even ate half a bowl more than usual. When Huang Yi, who was waiting on the side, saw the way the two interacted, she couldn't help but secretly chuckle. After eating, Xiao Su originally wanted to stay in the room for a while longer. Unfortunately, a certain someone was still holding a grudge over the meal just now and ignored him. Xiao Su inwardly laughed, then left the room, leaving this girl to be awkward on her own. After her lord left, Huang Yi ordered the servants to clean up the table, then walked over to Chu Qingyan with a deep smile on her face. Chu Qingyan looked up and saw Huang Yi's evil smile. She thought about how Huang Yi had clearly seen her embarrassing scene just now, so she couldn't help but purse her lips and say in an aggrieved manner, "Not only did you not make good food for me, you even laughed at me. I'm ignoring you in the future." Huang Yi burst into laughter, but when she received a certain someone's gaze, she forced herself to stop laughing. "Actually, it's not that the servant doesn't want to make those dishes for you, but Lord Ethereal said that you're not suited to eat spicy and seafood food at the moment. Otherwise, this servant wouldn't dare to be so harsh on you." Chu Qingyan finally remembered that when she dodged those knives and swords, her arm had been slightly grazed. She really couldn't eat those, otherwise it would leave a scar. She had an epiphany. No wonder Xiao Su didn't let her eat those things. Although his personality was a bit cold, he wouldn't go so far as to fight over food with a child. After receiving an answer, Chu Qingyan's mood improved for no reason, but she still kept a straight face and took the opportunity to threaten Huang Yi. Once her injuries were fully healed, she would make a table full of delicious food to appease her soul. Huang Yi readily agreed. Even Xining on the side interrupted and took the opportunity to act coquettishly. She also wanted to eat good food. When Chu Qingyan heard the laughter in the room, she couldn't help but think of her previous life in the Chu family. Compared to back then, she was living a more carefree life now. All of this was given to her by Xiao Su. If it weren't for his occasional care, she was afraid that she would have been eaten alive in this bottomless noble family's courtyard. She was no longer as fearful of Xiao Su as before, and he was no longer so distant from her. It seemed that sometimes she couldn't help but want to get closer to him, although he was always cold and emotionless. But the strange thing was that she could always feel a trace of warmth from him. She didn't know what the future would be like, but it was fine to grasp the present. Sometimes, some unknown fear came from people's own imagination. She wanted to live a life that wasn't so sad. And the person Chu Qingyan was thinking about was sitting in the study at this time. In the study, 2 long tables were placed separately. On the table was a brush, ink, paper, and inkstone. The generals and strategists who were preparing to sleep in their respective manors suddenly received a secret order from the Lord and rushed to the King of England's manor. Everyone thought that something big had happened and rushed over in a hurry. But when they saw the familiar scene in the study, everyone took a step back. The Lord wouldn't ask them to teach some parenting skills again. How to raise a child. How to make a child obediently answer the inexplicable test paper. Huling looked at these generals who had always been calm on the battlefield and couldn't help but laugh. King, Lord, why did you call us here in the middle of the night? A strategist who had always been eloquent stuttered at this time. Xiao Su faintly glanced at them, and everyone immediately lowered their bodies. Do the test paper, he ordered. Everyone couldn't help but look at the test paper on the table. On the birthday gift for the child. Everyone's eyes twitched. Where did the Lord get this question? King, Lord, I suddenly remembered that my mother has something to discuss with me. I'm afraid I can't. Lord, I also have something to do at home. My underage child is waiting for me to go back and coax him to sleep. Everyone started talking at once, and the study was very lively. But after they finished speaking, the person on the seat held his chin with one hand and played with the book pressure stone in his other hand. He looked relaxed, but the faint cold deterrence made everyone present shiver. Everyone was silent. If you can't finish it, then sleep in the study. His tone was faint. I can finish it. I can finish it. The people who were shouting that they had something to do at home rushed to the long table and quickly wrote. Huling shook his head. Shirking in front of the master was simply courting death. Xiao Su played with the stone and thought in his heart. He didn't know what good advice these think tanks could give. He never knew that giving a birthday gift was such a headache. Chapter 85. When the curtain of darkness fell, everyone began to prepare to rest. Chu Qingyan opened her eyes and waited. Ever since she was injured, Xiao Su would often come to see her before she went to sleep. After she fell asleep, he would return to his room. Perhaps he was worried that she would have nightmares again. While Chu Qingyan was waiting quietly, a white figure appeared on top of the walls of the King residence. The figure's charming eyes scanned the interior of the walls, and then, with a light tap of his feet, he shuttled through the interior of the residence, like a ghost in the night. His speed was extremely fast, and it was clear that his martial arts skills were very high. He easily passed through the layers of guards, and if one did not look closely, it would seem as though a gust of wind had brushed past one's face. The white figure's goal was very clear. He went straight to the study room. Before he came, he had already obtained the layout of the King of England's palace. But when he stood on a tree branch in front of a study room, he found that the room that should have been completely dark was now brightly lit. Moreover, the figure that was reflected on the window screen was tall and straight. It seemed like he was flipping through something in his hand. The white figure narrowed his phoenix eyes. If he didn't guess wrong, this person should be the King of England, Xiao Su. It seemed like he came at the wrong time, so when he was about to leave, the summer wind blew and blew up a corner of his clothes. It coincidentally entered the yawning Huoling's eyes. "Who is it? Come out!" Huoling coldly shouted. The white figure revealed an evil smile and flew out, flying towards Huoling. Huoling subconsciously blocked, but he never thought that person would turn around and quickly leave in the opposite direction. Huoling was shocked by how soft this person's body was. At this moment, that person had already flown several feet away. He felt like that person was deliberately playing with him. When he came to his senses, he angrily used his qinggong to chase after that person. When Xiao Su heard the commotion in the study room, he quickly came out. He saw that Huoling and the others had already chased after that person, but when he saw the direction they were chasing, his expression suddenly became gloomy. It was the direction of the inner courtyard. Chu Qingyan, who was a little sleepy, half closed her eyes. She was about to fall asleep when she heard some noise outside. It was accompanied by something about catching the assassin. She couldn't help but frown. At this moment, Xining pushed open the door and came in, looking a little flustered. Chu Qingyan asked, "What's going on outside? Why is it so noisy?" "I heard that an assassin broke into the manor. Lord Huoling is currently searching with the guards." Xining saw that her master was safe and sound, so she let out a sigh of relief. Chu Qingyan was a little surprised. The King of England's mansion was so heavily guarded, yet someone was able to break in. Then, how strong was the assassin's martial arts? At this time, Huoling's voice sounded from outside the door. "Ninth young Miss Chu, this subordinate has been ordered to capture the assassin. Is it convenient for you to enter and search?" She knew that Huoling was waiting outside, so she let Xining go out and report. Xining received the order and went out. Not long after, Huoling and several guards followed behind her. Huoling nodded at her and then began to search the room. But after going around in a circle, he told her to rest early and left by himself. Chu Qingyan was no longer sleepy after hearing this noise. She simply hugged the blanket and leaned against the bed. Seeing Xining standing up and yawning, she had her leave. When she was the only one left in the room, she began to ponder. What was someone planning to do by breaking into the king's palace? Was it an assassination? Or was it a theft? Her mind was a little confused. As long as she entered a noble family, this kind of thing would be unavoidable. Only, she never thought that someone would have ideas about the King of England's mansion. Chu Qingyan, who was deep in thought, suddenly smelled a scent that did not belong to the room. It was a faint scent of flowers. His eyes widened abruptly as he raised his head and met a pair of seductive phoenix eyes. When she was about to shout out, that person flicked his finger and a bead flew over. It hit her shoulder, and she could not speak at all. When she was stunned on the spot, the person that was stuck to the bed like a gecko fell down. Her white robes fluttered in the wind, drawing a beautiful arc in the air before landing gracefully. A pair of incomparably enchanting eyes were especially bright in the dark night, as if they were flickering with a demonic light. Her fair skin was covered by a white veil, and her peerless face was covered by a veil that could not be seen. Chu Qingyan was a little stunned. In her memory, she had never seen a person with such a beautiful figure before. She guessed that this person should be a rare beauty. While she was in a daze, the other side had already gently landed on the bed and looked at her. It had to be said, that pair of phoenix eyes were slightly raised, unintentionally releasing a charming aura. Chu Qingyan saw that the other side did not make a move to hurt her and only sealed her mute acupuncture point. She could not help but settle down to prevent the other side from getting angry and hurting her. The white-clothed person saw that she was tactful. He first swept his eyes over the room, and then his eyes fell on the person in front of him. The young girl, who was hugging the quilt and looking at him. Although she still looked a little immature, her beautiful face was revealed. Although there was some fear in her large eyes, she was able to calm herself down. He lightly glanced at her quietly moving body and revealed an evil smile. "If you move an inch, I don't mind cutting you an inch." A dagger suddenly appeared in his hand. The candlelight hit the blade and reflected a cold light. He deliberately lowered his voice, making it hard for people to hear. Chu Qingyan suddenly bit her lips. She thought that this person did not pay attention to her, so she wanted to take the opportunity to escape, but she did not think that the other side's eyes would be so sharp. At this time, a group of guards hurriedly passed by the window. The torches were burning, and the light shined in. It was reflected in the white-clothed person's eyes, and it had a different kind of temptation. Chu Qingyan secretly said in her heart, "Evildoer." Looking at his figure, he was not old, at most 16 or 17 years old. But to be able to enter the King of England's residence, it could be seen that he was skilled and daring. Chu Qingyan did not dare to provoke him. After all, her life was in his hands. Chu Qingyan thought for a moment and could not help but blink at the white-clothed person. The white-clothed person who was thinking about the outside world saw her eyes. The rotating blade on his 2 fingers paused and turned to point at her. He chuckled in a low voice. "What do you want to say?" This low chuckle, although it was a little strange because he deliberately changed his appearance, it was not difficult to hear the banter in his voice. Chu Qingyan was a little angry, but under the eaves, she had to lower her head. She raised her finger and wrote on the quilt. Even if the white-clothed person knew that she could not do anything in his hands, he was still attracted by her fearless idea. He looked down and was suddenly amused. "What will it take for you to let me go?" she wrote. Chu Qingyan raised her head and saw that the other party was looking at her thoughtfully, a little puzzled. Rumor has it that the 9th young miss of the Chu family is illiterate. Seeing it now, the rumor is not credible. The other party chuckled with a bewitching laugh. Chu Qingyan heard this and was startled. This person knew her? And at this time, a familiar sound of footsteps came from afar. She opened her eyes wide and looked up. Sure enough, she saw that the other party narrowed his eyes and became alert. The sharp blade was already aimed at her throat. Chapter 86. The air instantly froze. 9th Miss Chu is in the room. Lord Huiling has already sent people to search the room. Inside, they could hear the questioning from outside as well as the servant's response. Chu Qingyan recognized that the voice belonged to Xiao Su, and her eyes lit up slightly. The man in white could clearly feel the stirring of her emotions. He pressed the dagger closer and lowered his head to her ear. With a faint smile, he threatened, "If he wants to come in later, no matter what method you use, stop him." The faint scent of an unknown flower immediately lingered at the tip of her nose. It was not strong, but light and faint. She raised her head and looked at him blankly. However, the cold blade of the knife was pressed against her aorta on her neck. She instantly sobered up. Under his deterrence, she nodded lightly. The white-clothed man saw that she was obedient and unsealed her mute acupoint. He raised his phoenix eyes, indicating that she shouldn't play any tricks. Chu Qingyan cleared her throat and found that she could speak. She was slightly happy, but after receiving the other's threatening gaze, she restrained her emotions. "This king understands." Xiao Su dismissed the servant. He was about to turn and leave, but a string in his heart suddenly tightened. He couldn't help but stop and raise his hand to place it on the door. But he heard a muddled voice coming from inside. "Is His Highness outside?" Xiao Su lightly responded. "I heard that a bad person broke into the Fu. Qingyan is fine here. You need to be careful and rest early. Qingyan also needs to sleep." The words were still muddled and unclear, as if the person speaking was about to fall asleep. Xiao Su lowered his brows and lightly responded. The 2 people inside saw the figure that came through the door slowly turn around and then leave at a leisurely pace. Chu Qingyan bit her lip. She didn't know if the big ice cube heard her words or not. When the white-clothed man saw the person leave, his heart relaxed. He was about to praise this little girl for being tactful when his eyes suddenly narrowed and the dagger in his hand moved. A figure broke through the window and entered the room. A leaf in his hand flew over at a speed faster than the white-robed man. The man in white immediately jumped away, but the leaf made a turn in the air and pierced deeply into the bed wall beside Chu Qingyan. The man in white glanced at the wall of the bed. If he hadn't dodged in time, his wrist would have been crippled. He looked at Xiao Su, who had flown in, and gave a low laugh. He did not expect this person to be so vigilant. Perhaps the little girl had said something that had aroused Xiao Su's suspicion. He had really underestimated Chu Qingyan. Chu Qingyan could clearly feel that the other party was looking at her with a smile that was not a smile, and her body stiffened. Seeing that she was unharmed, Xiao Su didn't say a word. He raised his hand and attacked the man in white. The man in white raised his phoenix eyes, and a cunning light flashed in his eyes. The dagger in his hand flew towards the person on the bed. Xiao Su frowned, and the leaf in his hand flew towards the dagger. And in this pause, the man in white escaped through the window that Xiao Su had broken through. Chu Qingyan stared in a daze, as the dagger flying towards her was knocked down by the leaf in the air. This scene that only existed on television was actually happening in front of her eyes. Chu Qingyan felt that it was very inconceivable, but what followed was fear. She grabbed the blanket as a thought flashed through her mind. Just a bit more, she would have reported to the underworld. Suddenly, the sound of moderate footsteps slowly approached. She raised her head and saw Xiao Su walking towards her. She thought that he had already gone to chase after the assassin, but she never thought that he would still be here. She stared blankly at him as he leaned over and pulled her into his embrace. His large hands patted her back, and his voice had a gentleness that she had never seen before. "Don't be afraid. This king is here." Chu Qingyan woke up. So he thought that she had been frightened by the scene just now, so he was comforting her. She admitted that she had been frightened, but the moment she saw him appear, she was no longer afraid. I'm not afraid." Chu Qingyan buzzed in his embrace as she replied. Xiao Su saw that her mood was stable, so he let go of her. He checked her up and down, and seeing that she was fine, his expression returned to its usual cold expression. "Where's the man in white?" Chu Qingyan looked at the crumbling window and turned to ask him. Hualing has already gone to chase after him. But he expected that Hualing would not be able to catch up since that person's cultivation was not below his. Xiao Su fell into deep thought. Chu Qingyan nodded and then asked with a smile, "Your Highness, how did you guess that the assassin was in my room?" Xiao Su came out of his thoughts and looked at her. "You haven't seen this king recently, so you won't rest. Your words just now were different from normal, so this king knew that something was wrong." Chu Qingyan's face turned slightly red. What did he mean by she couldn't sleep without seeing him? But she was still very happy. He could see through her and help her escape from the tiger's den. "Your Highness, who is that man in white? Why did he suddenly appear in the king's palace?" Chu Qingyan tilted her head and asked in confusion. "Be a good girl and go to sleep. You shouldn't care about all of this." Xiao Su stood up and pulled the brocade quilt up to cover her exposed arms as he softly instructed her. Chu Qingyan obediently shrunk back into the blanket. Since he said this, he should have a plan. She could just eat, heal, and sleep as an obedient worm. Seeing her close her eyes and take deep breaths, Xiao Su finally slowly walked out of the room. At this time, Hualing and the others were already waiting outside the door. "Lord, this subordinate was incompetent and let him escape." Hualing's head was very low and he was a bit annoyed. "His skills are above yours, so you don't need to blame yourself. Send an order to Water Spirit to pay close attention to the movements of outsiders in the capital. Increase the manpower and strengthen the defenses of the king's palace." Xiao Su coldly said. This subordinate obeys. Hualing immediately left with his people. Xiao Su looked at the sky with his hands behind his back. The dark night sky was dotted with stars, but they seemed to fall into a bottomless abyss, unable to illuminate that deep pool. He could have caught that person just now, but he chose to save her first in an instant. He looked down at his hands with an unreadable expression. Once he had misgivings, it was hard to make a move. After Xiao Su left, the person who should have been sleeping opened her eyes. She reached out her hand and opened her fingers. A token in her hand was releasing a green light. Inside the jade circle, there was a moon character carved into it. She slightly closed her hand. This was something that the white-clothed person had accidentally dropped. She originally wanted to give it to Xiao Su, but she did not take it out in the end. In this world, there was no hatred for no reason, and there was no love for no reason. Towards Xiao, she still could not completely trust him, so why did he have such a pampering attitude towards her? Once she figured out what kind of attitude Xiao had towards her, she would give it to him. That pair of charming phoenix eyes appeared in her mind. Chu Qingyan's fingers unconsciously tightened. She hoped that she would not meet him again in the future because this person gave her a dangerous feeling. The white-clothed person broke away from his pursuers and landed on the eaves of a building. There were already 2 black-clothed people respectfully waiting for him. Young palace master. The 2 of them bowed. The white-clothed person took off his white veil and revealed his peerless face. His lips hooked into an evil smile. Xiao is more vigilant than I expected. In the future, without my orders, do not act on your own in the capital. This subordinate obeys. The 2 of them replied. Chapter 87. Chu Qingyan didn't know if it was just her imagination, but she felt that Xiao's mood was a little off these days, as if he was troubled by something. She couldn't explain how she felt it, but if asked in detail, she could only say that it was her woman's sixth sense. It had to be said that Chu Qingyan's sixth sense was quite accurate. Xiao was indeed troubled by something. And this matter was related to Chu Qingyan. In the study, Xiao flipped through the papers that his subordinates had handed in that day, but none of them satisfied him. He immediately put down the thick stack of papers and leaned back in his chair with a headache. Actually, he didn't need to treat Chu Qingyan's birthday so seriously. He could have ordered Hong Yi to organize a birthday banquet. But he didn't want to do that. It seemed that it was because Father Chu said that the most important birthday in a girl's life was when she was 10 years old, so he didn't want to treat it half-heartedly. Since he raised her like a child, he wanted to give her the best things in the world. He never mistreated his own people. However, as the days drew closer and closer, he still had no clue. He had been able to think of a way to break through the enemy's strange marching formations, but now, he had been defeated by a small birthday. He could not help but feel helpless. He got up and left the study. Just as he was about to walk to his room, he passed by Chu Qingyan's room and heard her talking to Xining. At this moment, Xining asked in confusion, "Why does that girl hate that guy?" Chu Qingyan leaned against the bed wall and smiled. "Because the girl likes bananas, but the guy gave her a cart of apples." Then the guy said that he was touched by his actions and asked the girl why she wasn't touched. The girl was speechless. Then the guy told the whole world that he spent all his money to buy her a cart of apples, but she wasn't touched at all. The girl must be a cold-hearted person. There must be something wrong with the girl's character. But the girl clearly only likes bananas. It means that you can't follow blindly, you can't just think whatever you want, you have to consider the other person's feelings. Chu Qingyan paused for a moment before continuing. It's that simple. She felt that children in ancient times matured early. In modern times, they were still in junior high school, while they were already married and had children. Therefore, she wanted to instill some modern ideas in Xining when she had nothing to do. However, after Xining heard this, she asked in confusion. That boy gave her an apple because he thought he had given the best to the girl. However, what the girl wanted was a banana. If the girl didn't say it out loud, who would know what she wanted? Master, don't you think so? Chu Qingyan was stunned by her words. Indeed, Xining's idea was not wrong. She couldn't help but pat Xining's head with a smile. You are indeed my student. You can draw inferences from one case. It is true that a famous teacher produces a brilliant student. Although her master was a little thick-skinned, Xining still felt that her master had praised her. She was very happy and her tail was about to stick up. However, no one saw a certain someone standing by the window with a thoughtful look in his eyes. On this day, Xiao and Chu Qingyan were eating in the room. Chu Qingyan felt that the atmosphere was a little dull. Biting her chopsticks, she thought about how to liven up the atmosphere. However, she didn't expect the person opposite her to speak first. Your father said that tomorrow is your birthday. How do you want to celebrate it? His tone was light, as if he had mentioned it inadvertently. Chu Qingyan's chopsticks paused and she looked at the person in front of her in surprise. Daddy actually told Xiao Su about this? Tomorrow was her birthday? Xiao Su actually asked her what she wanted to do? Chu Qingyan snapped out of her shock and saw that the person opposite her was waiting for her reply. She couldn't help but rub her nose. In the past, when she was at home, she celebrated every birthday by herself. Her father was either on a mission or her mother was on a business trip. They almost never saw each other on her birthday. Other than calling to wish her well and giving her money to invite her good friends to celebrate with her, they didn't do anything else. She was also used to buying a cake and going to karaoke with her best friends for a little liveliness. This was the first time that someone had seriously asked her how she wanted to celebrate her birthday. She really didn't know anything. That was all she could answer. You can't be casual. Xiao Su frowned when he heard that. The 10th birthday is considered a big event. You have to treat it seriously. Chu Qingyan was a little surprised that Xiao Su would place such importance on her birthday. Then, she really was too casual when she said that she would be casual. She thought about it and then said, "Why don't Huang Yi make a table of delicious food to celebrate?" Xiao Su felt that this was the only thing that her little brain could think of. He pondered for a moment before saying, "That's a good idea." Chu Qingyan sighed softly. Discussing such things with the big ice block was really stressful. Xiao Su tapped his fingers on the table and continued to say coldly, "Then what do you want?" Was Xiao Su asking her what she wanted as a birthday present? Was he going to give it to her? Chu Qingyan was stunned. She had thought that it was already beyond her expectations that he wanted to hold a birthday party for her. Little did she know that the real deal was waiting for her. She suddenly came back to her senses. Propping her chin with one hand, she tilted her head to look at him and asked tentatively, "Is anything okay?" Xiao Su raised his eyebrows. "It's within reason." Chu Qingyan smiled when she heard that. "It's definitely within reason. Then, what do you want the most?" Xiao Su didn't comment as he waited for her answer. Chu Qingyan wanted a lot of things, but humans weren't easily satisfied, so what she wanted wasn't material things. Her gaze landed on the mask that he wore every day, and she smiled slyly. "I want to take off your mask." She suspected that his face might not be disfigured because in novels, people usually wore masks to hide their appearance and not to be ugly. Except for this. Xiao Su didn't expect that to be what she wanted and immediately rejected it. Chu Qingyan sighed. This person was really annoying. He even said that everything had to be within reason. Her request was quite reasonable. All right, she changed it. "I want to cure Daddy's illness." She had always been worried about her father's illness. She knew that Ethereal's medical skills were very good. As long as Xiao Su gave an order, no matter how much Ethereal hated her, he would obey the order to treat her father. "It's about yourself," Xiao Su said impatiently. If this wasn't okay, that wasn't okay, then what was within reason? Then, "I want the stars in the sky." Chu Qingyan made an even more unreasonable request in a fit of anger. "That's fine." Xiao Su agreed without hesitation. This time, Chu Qingyan was dumbfounded. She stared blankly at the person in front of her. Did he hear what she wanted? Chapter 88. While Chu Qingyan was still in shock, Xiao Su had already stood up and left. Chu Qingyan bit her chopsticks and looked at Xining, who was also stunned. She asked, "Did the Lord agree just now?" Xining nodded blankly. "Master, you didn't hear wrong. The Lord wants to pluck the stars from the sky for you." Chu Qingyan covered her eyes with her hands. Heavens, she must have opened it in the wrong way. Otherwise, how could she have encountered such a scene? But when her birthday really came, there was a sumptuous feast in front of her. She had seen or not. When Huang Yi put down the last dish, she sincerely said to her, "Ninth young mistress, happy 10 years old." "Thank you." She was touched. After a while, her parents were also brought over by the guards of the prince's residence. The family had a reunion dinner. This was the first birthday she really celebrated with her parents since she could remember. The memories of the original body did not belong to her. Mother Chu gave her a peace lock and personally hung it around her neck. Then, She patted her shoulder and said with a choked voice, I didn't expect you to be 10 years old so soon. Time flies. You've grown up. Mother is happy for you. Chu Qingyan leaned over and hugged her mother. Her voice was a little hoarse. Mother, today is also your day of suffering. If you hadn't worked so hard to give birth to me, I wouldn't have appeared in this world. Mother is the greatest person in the world. I love you. In ancient times, due to the lack of hygiene, doctors did not know how to deliver babies correctly. Therefore, to the people of ancient times, childbirth was like the gate of hell. Many people had difficulties in giving birth and died because of it. Therefore, she had incomparable admiration and love for her mother. This was also the first time she had bravely expressed her love for her mother. In the modern world, Chinese people had always been shy to express their love for their parents. She followed this tradition until she transmigrated to ancient times. She regretted that she had never told her parents that she loved them. Until now, she took this opportunity to tell her parents the words she had hidden for a long time. Good. What a good child. Chu Machen's mother was embarrassed by her daughter's sudden confession. She wiped her tears and felt a little embarrassed. When Mr. Chu saw this, he ran over and hugged the mother and daughter. He smiled and said, I love you too. The three of them suddenly burst into laughter. Before he left, Chu Machen's father took out a stone from his pocket and stuffed it into his daughter's hand. He said that this was an immortal stone given to him by an immortal in a dream, so he was giving it to her. Amused, Chu Qingyan accepted it and watched her parents leave. When everything returned to normal, Chu Qingyan felt a little regretful. She didn't know what Xiao Su was busy with today. He hadn't appeared all day. She wanted to thank him properly and bring her parents over to celebrate her birthday with her. Unfortunately, she couldn't find him. She asked Hong Yi and the others, but they didn't know either. When night fell, Chu Qingyan was a little discouraged. It seemed that Xiao Su wouldn't appear today. She couldn't help but feel frustrated. He clearly said that he would accompany her. Why didn't he keep his word? What a big scammer. Just as she was cursing a certain someone in her heart, a certain someone appeared. Chu Qingyan widened her eyes at the person in front of her. She suddenly pursed her lips. Why did you only come back now? I didn't even leave any food for you. Actually, what she wanted to ask was why he didn't attend her birthday banquet. Chu Qingyan didn't notice that he was covered in dust and turned her head to look a little willful. Xiao Su broke into laughter. Unfortunately, his smile was hidden under his mask, so no one noticed. He approached her and looked down at her from above. I'll take you somewhere. Do you want to come? Chu Qingyan was stunned, but she immediately reacted. Yes. Xiao Su broke into laughter again, but this time, Chu Qingyan was a little stunned when she saw the hint of amusement in his inky eyes. However, she heard him shake his head and say, You're going with this prince without even asking where we're going. Aren't you worried that I'll trick you and sell you? As he said this, he bent down to pick her up. Chu Qingyan automatically reached out to hug his neck and naturally replied, If you want to sell me, you don't need to trick me at all. You can just pack me up and take me away. Xiao Su praised, You have self-awareness. That's right. She generously accepted this praise. Hold on tight. As soon as Xiao Su walked out of the door, he lowered his head and said to her. Immediately after, he flew up and tapped the roof with the tip of his foot, landing on the wall of the mansion. He then jumped up again, like an eagle spreading its wings in the night. She never thought that he would directly use his qinggong to carry her. The wind was very strong, lifting up her long hair and covering her eyes. She looked through the gaps and saw the black-clothed people closely following behind them. She only recognized one of them, which was Hualing. The other faces were all unfamiliar. She guessed that these people were his hidden guards. She placed her attention on him again and looked up to see the chin under the mask. That delicate skin, that perfect curve. It was hard to imagine that the face under the mask was ugly. Xiao Su lightly jumped up and down on the rooftops of the capital. Chu Qingyan experienced this rare feeling of flying. She reached out to grab her long hair that was flying in the air and giggled as she looked up to ask him, "Are these the stars you want to give me?" It was indeed very close. Every time she flew up and looked up, she could see the sky full of stars. This was the closest place she could think of to the stars.
"We're not there yet."
Xiao Su continued forward, but from her cheerful tone, he could feel her mood. Xiao Su was also affected for no reason. His brows relaxed, and his voice became less harsh. So there was still something good waiting for her. Chu Qingyan's heart jumped with joy as she waited in his embrace for the pleasant surprise to arrive. After a few jumps, they arrived at the foot of a mountain. Chu Qingyan thought this was the place, but Xiao Su did not stop moving forward. He lifted her up and easily headed towards the top of the mountain. Just now, the height of the roof was not too difficult for her, but now that she lowered her head, the entire town and village was beneath her feet. Her little heart trembled slightly, but more than that, she was curious. She felt that this trip would become the most beautiful scenery in her life. She listened to the sound of the wind brushing past her ears and felt the coolest greeting in the mountains. She squinted her eyes and opened them. The person on top of her head had black hair flying behind his back. With the night sky as the background, the silver mask shone under the moonlight. But this time, the mask he wore only covered the bridge of his nose. She could see his thin lips, which were pursed with a trace of coldness. But under the sparkling luster of the starlight, in the dark night, it rippled with a touch of enchanting sexiness. Chu Qingyan was stunned by the thought that flashed through her mind. Wasn't the big ice cube always as cold as winter iron? Could the words enchanting sexiness be associated with him? Why did she have such a strange thought? "We're here." His thin lips lightly opened, pulling her back to reality. She followed his gaze and instantly widened her eyes. Chapter 89. At first glance, there was a towering building at the top of the mountain. At second glance, she looked up. 1 floor, 2 floors, 3 floors. She couldn't count anymore. When did such a building exist in the capital? If there was, she should have heard of it. She got down from Xiao Su's arms. Her foot injury was much better now, so she limped a few steps before looking up. At third glance, the building was actually built with wooden planks. The wooden pillars were interlocked with each other, and there were all kinds of lifelike carvings on them. There were immortals riding the clouds, lifelike candied hawthorn skewers, carps swimming in the water. Everything was carved according to a child's preference. Seeing this, no matter how stupid she was, she could guess that this building was completed recently. The wooden planks were still new, and even the ground was moist from being plowed. She was shocked by this uncanny workmanship, and was also shocked that there was such a capable person in this world who could build such an ingenious pavilion in such a short period of time. Big ice cube, this must have taken a lot of effort, right? She stood in front of the building, unable to find words to describe her shock. Xiao Su didn't answer, but at this time, someone replied, "It didn't take too long. Just 6 hours." 6 hours? This simply broke Chu Qingyan's understanding. Wait, this voice? She looked in the direction of the voice and saw an 18 or 19-year-old man wearing a black silk headscarf. He smiled and cupped his hands in greeting. "Subordinate Mu Ling greets 9th Miss Chu. You are?" Chu Qingyan looked at Xiao Su, then looked at the man who called himself Mu Ling. Only then did she notice that there were more than 10 men in gray waiting quietly near the building. This subordinate is the commander in charge of craftsmen, carpenters, and blacksmiths in the Xiao cavalry. These people are this subordinate's skilled craftsmen. This time, the stargazing tower was built by them. Mu Ling saw her confusion and couldn't help but explain. Chu Qingyan's eyes lit up. Wow, she admired craftsmen the most. In the modern world, a high degree couldn't determine whether a person could live a tall, rich, and handsome life, but with a craft in hand, there was no problem in running rampant in society. In addition, the building's construction skills were superb. Chu Qingyan was simply in awe. Fast, accurate, beautiful. That's amazing. You guys are too amazing, I'll give you 32 likes. Chu Qingyan blurted out. Xiao Su originally thought that Chu Qingyan would be grateful to him, but he didn't expect her to drool over his subordinates. His face darkened. He reached out his hand, grabbed her collar, and walked to the building. This grab caught Chu Qingyan off guard. She flailed her arms and legs, feeling as if she couldn't breathe. How could this person change his face so quickly? He didn't know how to be gentle with women at all. Seeing this, Xiao Su threw her back. Her entire body landed on his broad back. He said, "Hold on tight," and jumped through the door. After finding the stairs, he quickly jumped through the stairs, going up one floor at a time. Chu Qingyan's head hit his back, and she suddenly felt dizzy. He was clearly thin, but just now, she clearly felt that she had hit hard muscles. She couldn't help but hug his neck with one hand and rub the small bump on her forehead with the other. He really didn't know how to be gentle. At this time, when she was cursing in her heart, she saw the structure of the building from the corner of her eyes. She originally thought that the building was built in such a short time, so the inside would be very simple and crude. She didn't expect that every corner of the building would be exquisite. The wooden tables, chairs, teapots, teacups, vases, and even the flowers in the vases were carved out of wood. They were so lifelike. She once again admired the exquisite craftsmanship of the ancient people. Xiao Su carried her all the way up. She thought that if her leg wasn't injured, she wouldn't know how long it would take for her to climb up step by step. Now that there was a free elevator, this injury really came at the right time. Xiao Su's speed became faster and faster. Chu Qingyan could no longer see the scenery around her. The wind blew and hurt her eyes. She couldn't help but close them. When the wind stopped, she slowly opened her eyes and was immediately stunned. She couldn't care less about her hairstyle that had been washed, cut, and dried. She stared blankly at the starry sky above her head. She seemed to have arrived at a sea of stars. She could touch those twinkling stars with just a stretch of her hand. The wind blew past, and her fingertips were slightly cold. She lowered her head and looked down. What she saw was Xiao Su's slightly raised side profile. Under the silver mask, his exquisite side profile was faintly revealed. She was a little confused. "This is..." Xiao Su put her down and placed her on a wooden chair on the top floor. He stood with his hands behind his back. Zhaixing Lu, Chu Qingyan heard him and looked around. This was an open roof. Other than the railings, there was no roof. Looking down, the people at the bottom of the building were already the size of a fist. She suddenly remembered a poem she learned when she was young. The dangerous building was 100 feet high, and one could pluck the stars with one's hand. He didn't dare to speak loudly for fear of alarming the people above. He was probably the only one who dared to build a tall building on top of a mountain. She was touched by his concern for her. She raised her eyes and looked up at the sky full of stars. She then looked at the person beside her. He was dressed in brocade, as if he wanted to blend into the night. However, the aura he exuded could not be ignored. She couldn't help but think of the domineering CEOs described in modern romance novels. Then he pointed at the world and said to her, "You've taken over the entire galaxy." Haha, Chu Qingyan gave herself a thumbs up for her imagination. However, she quickly stopped laughing. Otherwise, Xiao Su would think that she was crazy with joy. She mischievously stretched out her hand, as if she could really pluck those stars. At this moment, a grape-sized bead was stuffed into her hand. Chu Qingyan looked at the person beside her suspiciously. She saw his back facing the light as he lowered his head to look at her. He muttered, "The stars you wanted." Hearing this, Chu Qingyan subconsciously looked at her hand. Because she was holding it, there was a faint light inside. She couldn't help but be curious. She immediately opened her hand. Suddenly, there was a bright light, as if a white lotus had suddenly bloomed. A halo of light bloomed, blurring her eyes. She waited until her eyes had adjusted to the light before she saw that it was a round white jade bead. It felt comfortable to the touch and was slightly warm in the palm of her hand. It was as if the source of heat would flow into her blood and meridians through the palm of her hand. Could it be that this was the legendary top-grade unpolished jade that was said to be warm in the winter and cool in the summer? What is this? She pulled the sleeve of the person beside her and asked curiously. The starlight passed through the gap between her fingers and shone into her eyes. They were sparkling brightly, brighter than the stars. Xiao Su curled his lips, ripples appearing at the corner of his mouth. A protective bead carved from a fluorite cloud. It can be used to avoid poison, calm the heart, and nourish the body. Xiao Su explained. Fluorite cloud? She had never heard of it. However, she felt that the name was quite grand. Perhaps she was just ignorant. Is it for me? Chu Qingyan looked at him eagerly. Xiao Su curled his lips. What do you think? He rarely spoke to her so gently. Chu Qingyan forgot herself and hugged his arm. She said happily, Big ice block, you're so nice. Xiao Su lowered his head and stroked her head. Qingyan, happy 10th birthday. Chapter 90. When they came down from Zhaixing Lu, she was still carried down on Xiao Su's back. Mu Ling was very familiar with the name Chu Qingyan, but when he saw with his own eyes that his master did not resist her and even intimately carried her on his back like a child, he really believed that his master treated this little girl differently from other people. His eyes swept over the fluorite cloud that Chu Qingyan was casually playing with in her hand, and he was stunned. At this time, he heard her tilt her head and say to his master, Protective bead doesn't sound very good. Can I change its name? Up to you. Then it's decided on you, Xingchen. Chu Qingyan giggled. Xiao Su did not comment. Then Mu Ling watched as Chu Qingyan tossed his master up and down. Little grand aunt, you're tossing an entire city in your hands to play with. Then he saw her casually stuff the bead into her sleeve. Mu Ling's eyes were about to fall out of their sockets. He used his eyes to ask his master, Did you not tell this little grandaunt that there are only 3 pieces of this fluorite cloud in the world, and one of them is the one in her hand? Xiao Su indifferently glanced at him. So what if he told her? So what if he didn't tell her? Mu Ling really wanted to gouge out his own eyes. If he had known, he would not have helped his master grind the fluorite cloud into a bead and let this little grandaunt play with it like a marble. Chu Qingyan felt Mu Ling's gaze on her and raised her brows. She looked over at him, but unexpectedly, he had already turned away. She originally wanted to establish a good relationship with him so that she could secretly learn from him in the future. Their craftsmanship was really too good. If she left the Wang Fu in the future and had nowhere to go, she could still make a living from this craftsmanship. At this time, Chu Qingyan heard Xiao Su's cold order, Tear it down. Yes. Mu Ling accepted the order and waved to the people behind her. Immediately, everyone swarmed up and flew upstairs. They quickly began to dismantle the building. Chu Qingyan was dumbfounded. In the blink of an eye, 3 floors had been demolished. She came to a realization. The sudden appearance of such a tall building on top of this mountain, with its speed and exquisite design, could very well arouse the suspicion of others. That was why it was demolished immediately after it was built, so that no one with ulterior motives would be able to get hold of it. Moreover, Xiao Su's identity was known. If the Sichuan emperor heard about this, there would be some criticism. She looked at Zhaixing Lu, which had suddenly become much shorter, and felt a little emotional. This was the first time he was so close to the vast starry sky. This was the first time someone had really built a stargazing tower because of his nonsense. She couldn't help but think of an illusion. It was about how King Yu of Zhou did such a ridiculous thing in order to win Bao Si's smile. And the big ice cube actually spent so much manpower and material resources for her birthday. Was it the same as King Yu of Zhou? Because of the time they spent together, she was no longer so careful around Xiao Su. Or rather, she was no longer so careless with her words. When she came back to her senses, she had already blurted out the words without thinking. At this time, she saw Mu Ling stagger and look up at her in horror. It was obvious that Mu Ling was frightened by her words. She immediately regretted that she had been too bold. She didn't know if Xiao Su was angry at her analogy. But Xiao Su's emotions didn't fluctuate much. He said lightly, 6 hours. Using local materials, it doesn't take much material resources. And these 12 people have been too idle recently, so this king pulled them out to practice. Chu Qingyan choked. Cough, cough. She looked around at the empty mountain peak. She could still see that this place used to be a dense forest. She felt like her knee had been struck by an arrow. Indeed, it didn't take much manpower and material resources. Mu Ling, who is currently directing people to dismantle, also felt like his knee had been struck by an arrow. Although it didn't take much energy to dismantle several dozen stories of tall buildings, their master had requested for quality and quantity. It had to be completed within 6 hours. They really wanted to hug each other and cry. Hualing walked over and patted his shoulder. They were in the same boat, so he said, if you met her father, you would feel that your life right now would be perfect. Mu Ling had also heard about the Chu family's foolish father that could make Turins so angry. Thinking about how powerful he was, he couldn't help but look at Hualing with sympathy. It was a pity that Mu Ling never expected that if he sympathized with someone today, he would have to sympathize with himself in the future. Chu Qingyan looked around aimlessly. Her eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Where was Star-Plucking Tower? Where did it go? Looking around, there was only an empty piece of land. Then she saw a pile of wood on the side. And Hualing, Turin, was currently directing people to bundle the wood into small piles and then carry them on their backs. What are they doing? Are they destroying the corpses? Chu Qingyan pointed at Hualing and the others as she asked the people below her. Recycling trash. Xiao Su turned and flew down the mountain after saying this. Hold on tight. Chu Qingyan obediently hugged his neck. Then she turned around to look at Hualing and the others carrying piles of wood that were taller than them as they followed behind. She thought that if someone woke up in the middle of the night and saw these giant things, they would be scared out of their wits. The next day, there really were people who were scared out of their wits. Huang Yi looked at the yard and the piles of wood in the kitchen, and her eyes almost fell out. She had people send some wood over yesterday, but she didn't need this much. Heavens, how long would it take to burn all this firewood? Sitting on the bed, listening to Xining report Huang Yi's exploding expression, Chu Qingyan burst out in laughter. This big ice cube really was a thrifty youth. The peaceful days passed like water. What didn't change was that her parents would occasionally come to see her. Her father would still cause a ruckus in the king's palace. Those servants were angry at him, but they couldn't do anything because he had the king's little princess backing him up. Xiao Ran would also come to see her from time to time, but he had been busy with his studies recently, so the number of times he came to the king's palace had decreased. Speaking of which, it had been several days since she last saw him, so she did miss him a bit. What changed was that the weather became hotter and hotter. There was also her foot injury. After 2 months of rest, it was almost healed. On this day, she was eating with Xiao Su, but she was a bit distracted. Xiao Su looked at her. Don't multitask while eating. Chu Qingyan stuck out her tongue. She felt that this big ice cube had more and more potential to be a father. She ate 2 mouthfuls of rice, and her eyes turned. She probed, Your Highness, my foot injury is almost healed. Can I go out to play? Xiao Su glanced at her. Chu Qingyan could see the disbelief in his eyes, and immediately stood up. She spun a few times for him to see. Look, can I run and jump now? Just let me go out for a walk. I've been in the Fu for the past 2 months, and grass is about to grow. Xiao Su's gaze moved up and landed on the top of her head. Wait until the flowers bloom. Chu Qingyan choked. I'm just using a metaphor. Just let me go out to play. It's fine if you don't let me go out, but you'll play with me? Xiao Su raised an eyebrow. It looked like after a few months of rest, her temper had grown. She actually dared to threaten him. But after reading the parenting manual, he also knew that it was normal for children to want to play. She had been cooped up in the Fu for a period of time, so it was time to let her go out for a walk. Otherwise, she would quickly enter the rebellious stage. The parenting manual concluded that children in the rebellious stage were the most troublesome for their parents. Bring along the Fu's guards. Chu Qingyan felt like she was on a roller coaster and immediately jumped up. I knew that Big Ice Cube is the best. Big Ice Cube? He seemed to have gotten used to this title after hearing it so often. Chapter 91. After the meal, Chu Qingyan immediately went to change her clothes. When she finished tidying up and walked out of the room with Xining, there was already someone waiting for her at the door with his arms crossed. It was actually Turin, the Turin who hated her the most. She was obviously stunned and asked hesitantly, "Did His Highness send you to protect me?" Turin looked at her coldly. "That's right." Chu Qingyan's excited heart suddenly felt like it was splashed with a bucket of cold water. She and Xining looked at each other and felt that they were probably going to freeze to death. Turin's hostility made them shiver all over. Chu Qingyan wanted to cry, but had no tears. Could she ask for someone else? "Ninth Miss Chu, you're not leaving?" Turin was a little impatient. Chu Qingyan immediately responded, "Let's go." Thus, Chu Qingyan, her servant, and Turin's 2 plainclothes bodyguards made a total of 5 people. Although the person beside her always emitted an aura of hostility, Chu Qingyan was not a person who wanted everyone to be good to her. She knew that Turin looked down on her, but she was not a banknote. How could everyone like her? Moreover, she did not like people who were cold to her, so she just minded her own business. On the road, there were many women of her age who came out to play. Although women did not go out of the house in ancient times, in the dynasty she lived in, the restrictions on women were not so strict. However, once a woman reached the age of marriage, she would consciously reduce the number of times she went out. This was because they were busy sewing wedding clothes and learning how to take care of the house. They simply did not have the leisure time to go out. However, Chu Qingyan could still see many beautifully dressed women walking around outside, buying things. Green robes with wide sleeves and red hairpins flashing in the wind. There was no conflict of interest between people. There was laughter, and there would not be neighbors who did not interact with each other. This was a simple and honest dynasty. There was no rolling oil and smoke, no choking secondhand smoke, and no chemical pollution. This was a beautiful and pollution-free dynasty. Chu Qingyan sighed with emotion. Turin, who hadn't been paying attention to Chu Qingyan, heard her sighs. He couldn't help but feel that this woman was a little strange. He couldn't help but take a few steps back. Chu Qingyan had already prepared to treat these guards as heir. She walked slowly on the busy street with Xining. They looked here and there, but they didn't buy anything. Everything was just for the novelty. Although Turin was impatient, he couldn't say anything because of his master's order. He could only follow step by step while maintaining a certain distance. Chu Qingyan walked in front of a vendor and saw a pearl hair clip that was quite pleasing to the eye. She couldn't help but stop her footsteps. She was about to pick it up and play with it when she heard a burst of noise not far away. She couldn't help but look towards the source of the noise. He saw several men dressed as servants surrounding something, and the leader of the group, a man wearing a peacock-patterned robe, was scolding something. She took a closer look and vaguely saw a petite woman lying on the ground. She couldn't help but feel puzzled. The vendor also saw this scene and said, "It's a sin." Thinking that the vendor knew something, Chu Qingyan immediately asked, "Boss, do you know what's going on in front?" The stall owner originally didn't want to meddle, but seeing that she was still young, his love for the young was aroused. So he said to her, "Do you see that man in the lead? That's the younger brother of Imperial Concubine Yu, whom His Majesty dotes on the most. Usually he bullies men and women in the capital." Chu Qingyan heard this and thought that it was the kind of thing that was often seen in TV dramas. She just never thought that she would encounter it. She wanted to go up and see who was being bullied. She had just taken a few steps when she was blocked in front of her. She looked up and saw that it was Turin. At this moment, his face was full of impatience, and he looked at her disapprovingly. "Ninth young Miss Chu, you should go back. Don't meddle in this kind of thing." Chu Qingyan knew that she shouldn't meddle in this matter, but when he said that, she suddenly became angry. As a guard of the prince's residence, shouldn't you step forward and stop this kind of thing? You represent the King of England. Turin poured cold water on her. But this subordinate shouldn't cause trouble for the Lord. This kind of thing should be handled by the Yaman's people. As the Lord's subordinates, we should know that we shouldn't overstep our duty. Chu Qingyan wanted to refute again, but at this moment, the noise suddenly approached. She and Turin looked over. The woman who was surrounded suddenly broke through the encirclement and ran towards Chu Qingyan and the others. However, she tripped and fell at Chu Qingyan's feet. Those men instantly surrounded her. That woman was in utter despair. She raised her head abruptly and met Chu Qingyan's bright eyes. Instantly, she felt a strong desire to live. Young mistress, please save me. I told you to run. I told you to run. The man in the peacock-embroidered robe smiled cruelly. He took the stick from the servant and was about to hit that woman. In a flash, Chu Qingyan didn't have time to think and raised her hand to stop him. Stop. She looked at those men with a determined gaze. In modern times, people were taught from a young age to be willing to help others and help the weak. If everyone was selfish and only knew how to protect themselves and let those who did evil get away with it, it would simply fuel their anger and courage. That man stopped when he heard that and looked angrily at the person who suddenly appeared in front of him. Who are you? You dare to meddle in my business? Chu Qingyan was still young. Although her clothes were of good quality and there were guards by her side, Fu Wanlai, who had always been domineering, didn't put her in his eyes at all. Chu Qingyan coldly snorted. Bullying the common people and committing violence on the street. No matter who it is, they can come and say a few words of justice. Fu Wanlai laughed heartily when he heard this. He smiled at the servants beside him and said, another little girl who hasn't seen the world. Tell her, where is the person who meddled in my business now? Sleeping in the mass grave. Haha. The servant looked at Chu Qingyan with an expression that said she was overestimating herself. Chu Qingyan didn't care about this group of motley crew. She first had Xining and herself help the woman up. As soon as she touched the woman, she saw that she was beaten up in many places. It could be said that her skin was torn and her flesh was exposed. Chu Qingyan was abnormally angry. It wasn't that she was a saint, but sometimes, when something happened, even if she didn't have the ability, she still wanted to stand up. Evil someone had to be restrained. At this time, when he saw that Chu Qingyan, this little girl, didn't take him seriously, he immediately flew into a rage out of humiliation. He angrily said to Chu Qingyan and the others, come, beat her for me. Turin, if I didn't forget, His Highness sent you to protect me? Chu Qingyan looked at these approaching people and suddenly turned her head to the people who were watching the show with folded arms and leisurely smiled. She didn't have any awareness of the impending disaster. Turin was stunned. He immediately knew that Chu Qingyan had grasped his weakness. He didn't have to save that woman, but with his master's orders, he couldn't ignore Chu Qingyan. But the other party was Consort Yu's younger brother. He frowned. Just as he was hesitating, the people were already approaching. And then, the sound of the wooden fish sounded, and the fragrance of the Buddhist lotus grew clearer. Chu Qingyan turned her head and saw a handsome monk standing at the corner of the street. There was a smile at the corner of his mouth, and he was chanting in a low voice. Amitabha, benefactor, please stop. Chapter 92. It's Master Su Jian, Master. Greetings, Master. Master's grace. The moment the monk appeared, the commoners who had gathered around to watch the commotion all knelt down to pay their respects. Instantly, the atmosphere around Chu Qingyan became much better. Almost everyone was kneeling down to pay their respects, except for one person who was standing in the crowd. Girl, kneel down. Master's Buddhist light cannot be blasphemed. Some people tried to persuade her, but Chu Qingyan did not do so. In her mind, she should kneel to the heavens, the earth, and her parents. Although there was a clear hierarchy in this dynasty and there were times when she had to kneel, she could not just kneel to one person. She bowed slightly and cupped her hands at the person who came. Master Su Jian. Benefactor Chu, how have you been? Su Jian did not care about these empty formalities. To him, it did not matter whether they kowtowed or not. He was just used to people kowtowing to him everywhere he went. He knew it was useless to stop them, so he did not waste his breath. Master, how have you been? Chu Qingyan smiled and replied. Su Jian walked forward slowly, his monk robes fluttering in the absence of wind, as if he was riding the wind. People automatically made way for him. He smiled at the people. When the people stood up, Su Jian turned to Fu Onlai, who was about to attack again. Benefactor Fu, please show mercy. Fu Onlai raised his thick brows. Master, you're not cultivating in Buddhism, but you're here to meddle in the secular world? Buddha, the great hermit, lives in the city. The world is his home. He cultivates in the secular world and becomes a Buddha in the secular world. Therefore, this poor monk does not meddle in the secular world, but meditates in seclusion. Su Jian put his palms together and smiled. Then it's not against the law for me to capture an escaped servant, right? Fu Onlai said in a different way, intimidated by Su Jian's reputation in Sichuan. When the woman heard this, she immediately knelt down in tears and said, Great Master, yesterday, this little girl's closest relative unfortunately passed away. Today, I came back from the funeral, but unexpectedly, I was met by this evil tyrant. He forcefully pulled this little girl away. When this little girl refused, he ordered people to beat this little girl up. This little girl is not a runaway servant from his residence. Chu Qingyan glared at Fu Onlai. What a beast! Seeing this, Fu Onlai wanted to swing the stick at her, but he was pulled back by a gentle force. He took a few steps back and only had time to see Su Jian retract his hand. Almsgiver Fu, greed, anger, infatuation, and hatred are the demons of the mortal world. Silence is a demon that confuses one's mind and messes up one's nature, Su Jian said with a smile. That's right, that's right. Bullying an innocent woman. What kind of man are you? Why haven't you left yet? Grandmaster is here. How can you be so rude? The spectators, who had been silent just now, were now snorting with anger. They treated Fu Onlai as a rat that everyone wanted to beat, and they spoke rudely and angrily. Chu Qingyan found it hard to believe. Just a moment ago, he had been an indifferent bystander, but now, he had become the embodiment of controversy. She could not help but look at Su Jian, who was as quiet as a mirror, and clicked her tongue. Could this be the power of faith? A monk could actually change the situation and control people's hearts? Fu Onlai saw that the situation was over, but he could not directly clash with Su Jian. He knew that Su Jian had always been an honored guest of the imperial family. Even his sister had to be courteous to him. There was no need for him to fall out with him over a woman. However, it was important to find a scapegoat for this embarrassing matter. Thus, Fu Onlai glared at Chu Qingyan. Don't ever let me see you again. Chu Qingyan shrugged indifferently. His inexplicable anger was directed at her. Only then did Fu Onlai lead his people back the way they had come. Thank you, Grandmaster. The woman immediately knelt in front of Su Jian, her heart filled with gratitude. Su Jian helped her up, then said, Miss, if you have no parents at home, leave the capital and seek refuge with your relatives. It's your fortune to be able to receive Grandmaster's guidance. That's right. It's hard for ordinary people to even get a word of advice from Grandmaster. The commoners all agreed. The woman immediately kowtowed. Thank you, Grandmaster, for your guidance. Go. Su Jian smiled. The woman immediately left after thanking him. Xining saw this and couldn't help but complain on behalf of her mistress. Mistress, you spent so much effort to save her, but she only cared about thanking Grandmaster Su Jian. She didn't even say a word of thanks to you. You saved her for nothing. Chu Qingyan didn't care much when she heard this. If I saved her just for a word of thanks, it would go against my original intentions. Humans are born good. I just didn't want to follow my heart and save her. I just wanted to have peace of mind. Perhaps if she didn't save her today, she would feel bad about it in her dreams. Actually, her original intentions weren't that noble. She just wanted peace of mind and not regret it. Xining immediately understood the superficial meaning of her words. She couldn't help but give her mistress a thumbs up. Mistress, you're awesome. Xining gives you 32 likes. Chu Qingyan shook her head and couldn't help laughing at this little fellow who applied what she had just learned. Her trip today wasn't over yet, so she couldn't delay any longer. Just as she was about to leave, she saw Su Jian standing in the crowd and looking at her. Chu Qingyan couldn't help but stop in her tracks. Although this person was wearing a Buddhist robe and doing things like a fraud, this person had saved her before, so she couldn't just leave like this. Thus, she walked up to him and looked up at him. Grandmaster, I didn't have time to thank you that day. Now I'm formally thanking you. Chu Qingyan couldn't be blamed for always thinking of Su Jian as a fraud. It was because after he said those incomprehensible things in front of Xiao Su, she didn't have a good impression of him. She always kept a respectful distance from people who deliberately mystified things. Su Jian smiled. Benefactress doesn't need to be so polite. You've already thanked me once at that time. Chu Qingyan rubbed her head. She couldn't remember. Could it be that she had been scared silly at that time? However, she still had to return the favor. Why don't Qingyan play the host and treat you to a meal? Chu Qingyan asked casually. Actually, she didn't think that such a pure and simple person like Su Jian would eat with her. However, since he was here, she had to be polite. Su Jian originally wanted to decline, but on second thought, he agreed. Tea is fine. Turin looked at Su Jian in disbelief. Usually, it was almost impossible for high officials and nobles to invite him to a meeting. Now, this Chu Qingyan had only casually mentioned it, and he agreed. He suddenly felt that as long as Chu Qingyan was around, things would become strange. Chu Qingyan also choked. She had only casually mentioned it, so why did he also casually agree? Could it be that Buddhist disciples only knew how to recite sutras, but didn't know anything about the ways of the world? She was obviously just being polite. However, since words had been spoken, water had been spilled, so Chu Qingyan didn't hesitate. After this meal, she and Su Jian were even. She didn't have a good impression of Su Jian. It wasn't that this person looked extremely fierce. On the contrary, this person gathered spiritual energy. His handsome face could be said to be as pure and holy as a lotus flower. However, she wanted to keep a respectful distance from him because she felt that this person seemed to have a great impact on her and the people she cared about in the future. Chapter 93. Since he wanted to drink tea, Chu Qingyan found a tea house. Although it wasn't big, it was clean and tidy. What kind of tea would you like to drink? The waiter asked enthusiastically with a towel draped over his shoulder. After they sat down, Chu Qingyan asked with a smile, "What kind of tea do you have?" Oolong tea, Biluakun tea, Tiguanyin tea, and all kinds of flower teas, the waiter said with great familiarity. "What kind of flower teas do you have?" Chu Qingyan was interested in flower teas. "We have jasmine tea, chrysanthemum tea, osmanthus tea, lotus tea." Chu Qingyan waited for him to finish before turning to ask Su Jian, who had been quietly acting like a handsome man, what kind of tea would great master like to drink? "It's up to you, lady benefactor," Su Jian replied with a smile. Chu Qingyan felt that the lotus tea was not bad and suited his temperament, so she asked for a pot. The waiter immediately agreed and turned to prepare the tea. Chu Qingyan rested her chin on her hands and looked at the person in front of her. She felt that it was quite awkward to look at each other in silence, so she thought of a topic to break the ice. "Great master, I saw you send that person flying with a wave of your hand just now. Is that the legendary inner strength?" Su Jian smiled faintly. "You can say that. Great master, you don't seem very old. How long have you been a Buddhist?" Before the tea was served, Chu Qingyan racked her brains to come up with a topic. "I grew up in a temple since I was young," Su Jian replied. There was another awkward silence after that. Su Jian seemed to know that she was looking for a topic to talk about and smiled faintly. Benefactor, you don't have to deliberately greet me. Feel free to do as you please. Was it so easy for him to see through her thoughts? Chu Qingyan rubbed her nose. Just as the tea was served, she took this opportunity to cover up her discomfort. Xining went forward to pour tea for the two of them. Chu Qingyan picked up the cup and blew on it before taking a sip. She found that the tea tasted good. It had a faint lotus fragrance with a hint of bitterness. He must have put in the lotus seed core, which had the effect of clearing heat and detoxifying. It tastes good, Chu Qingyan praised from the bottom of her heart. When she put down the cup, she saw Su Jian holding the prayer beads in one hand and holding them forward with the other. His eyes were closed, as if he was isolated from the world. She couldn't help but chuckle. Master, you're not here to drink tea, but to smell the fragrance of the tea, right? Su Jian faintly smiled. The aroma is a part of the tea. If you know the tiniest details, you will know the taste. Whether you drink it or not isn't that important. Chu Qingyan raised her eyebrows. This person was too boring. Drinking tea was like chanting scriptures. However, how he drank tea had nothing to do with her. Anyway, she was in charge of treating him. Just as Chu Qingyan finished her second cup, the person in front of her opened his eyes and looked at her. His gaze was emotionless. Benefactress, there's something this penniless monk doesn't understand. Even the master has something he doesn't understand? Chu Qingyan was surprised. In the myriad worlds, there will always be things that you don't understand. Buddhism is a path of seeking knowledge and attaining the Tao. Su Jian didn't feel embarrassed by her surprise. Instead, he spoke in a natural and unrestrained manner. Qingyan is very honored to be asked by the master. However, the master is very experienced and knowledgeable. I'm afraid that Qingyan might not be able to answer your question. Chu Qingyan propped up her chin with one hand and replied indifferently. Su Jian smiled. It's fine. What this penniless monk doesn't understand is, when so many people were indifferent, why did Benefactress stand up? At that time, her attendants had been standing behind her without any intention of saving her. He had walked so many roads and seen so many injustices. It wasn't that no one had ever stood up for justice. However, at her age, she still dared to stand up as a young woman. This really surprised him. He hadn't expected that he would ask about this matter. Chu Qingyan smiled lazily. Master, I'm just doing something that I won't regret. What do you mean? He asked. I can't just stand by and watch someone die. Perhaps the master thinks that I'm overestimating myself, but I just thought that if that person was me and no one was willing to stand up for her, I would feel despair towards this world. There is no kindness between people. I believe in the butterfly effect. When one person stands up, it will affect others. When one person affects another, more and more people will stand up. She was just speaking her thoughts in the modern world. However, she knew that in ancient times, there was a clear distinction between hierarchy and inferiority. Those with power were in control, while those at the bottom were as lowly as ants. Who would care about kindness and evil? High officials and nobles cared about power, while commoners cared about food and clothing. Although her ideas in the modern world didn't conflict with those in the modern world, they couldn't find a point of agreement. Thinking of this, she felt a little sad. Su Jian was silent for a moment. Then, he raised his head and looked at her. There seemed to be a slightly different light in his compassionate gaze. Benefactress has a kind heart. Thank you for the master's praise. Chu Qingyan smiled carelessly. Actually, this wasn't rare. In the modern world, many people would stand up because there were more good people than bad people. Moreover, in a society ruled by law, the bad people wouldn't dare to be so rampant. Even if they used their status to bully others, they would be exposed on the internet and become the target of public criticism. It was just a different era. She did what she wanted to do. Then if there was a second time, would Benefactress still step in to save someone? Su Jian continued to ask. Chu Qingyan thought for a moment. I'll make a decision after assessing the situation. After all, it's not my original intention to fight against a rock with an egg. I'll act according to my ability. I can't be reckless. Su Jian smiled. Although her answer was a little different from her previous answer, he could understand the meaning behind it if he thought about it carefully. Does benefactress want to stop this kind of thing? Chu Qingyan looked at him in confusion. What does the master mean? I want to use kindness to change the world and reduce the number of incidents like today. Su Jian smiled faintly. Chu Qingyan's eyes widened. Why couldn't she understand what he was saying? Seeing that she was still looking at him blankly, Su Jian patiently said, "This penniless monk will guide you into Buddhism. In the future, you will follow this penniless monk and preach Buddhism. You will use the Dharma to change the world. You will make good people more virtuous and evil people more virtuous." Chu Qingyan felt like she had just heard the funniest joke in the world. Someone was actually advising her to become a nun. If this were the modern world and her parents found out, they would probably think that this person was spouting nonsense. Her father would probably flip his hand and throw this person out of the door. Just as Chu Qingyan was about to laugh out loud, she saw the handsome youth in front of her smiling and looking at her seriously. Chu Qingyan's smile froze on her face. She said in disbelief, "The master must be joking, right? Monks don't lie." Su Jian smiled, but his tone was serious. "Why me?" Chu Qingyan couldn't help but ask. "Because you have an affinity with Buddha," Su Jian replied. The corners of Chu Qingyan's eyes twitched. Which eye of his saw that she had an affinity with Buddha? "Master, do you often do this, swindling some young boys and girls who don't know about worldly affairs into Buddhism?" Su Jian didn't get angry when faced with her questioning, dissatisfaction, and rudeness. Instead, he smiled and said, "You are indeed not the first person this penniless monk has converted." Chu Qingyan immediately believed in her own thoughts. As expected, he was tricking her again. Then she heard him say, "It's just that this penniless monk doesn't take in disciples easily. You are the first." She looked up in surprise and met his eyes. It was as if she saw lotus flowers blooming in his eyes. They were so noble and pure that she didn't dare to look directly at them. Chapter 94. Chu Qingyan snapped out of her daze under his calm gaze. She suddenly felt a little irritated. "Master, although I revere Buddhism, I have no intention of becoming a monk. Furthermore, don't you think it's a little ridiculous to say such things to a 10-year-old child? Who would want to be his disciple? Who knew if the charlatan would turn her into a little charlatan and swindle people everywhere? Besides, she did not want to be accompanied by the sound of wooden fish and bells for the rest of her life. Although the rain is broad, it is difficult to moisten the rootless grass. Buddhism is vast and does not help those who are not fated. Age does not matter. Female benefactor, you have the root of wisdom. It will be a pity if you do not enter Buddhism." Su Jian guided patiently. Chu Qingyan rolled her eyes. According to what he said, everyone had a root of wisdom, and everyone should enter the Buddhist sect. If that were the case, then the entire world would be filled with monks. Chu Qingyan wanted to retort, but seeing his firm attitude, it seemed like he really wanted to pull her into Buddhism. She really wanted to flip the table, but in the end, she held it in. She recalled everyone's reverence for him just now. She did not want to attract public resentment. Since he wanted her to enter Buddhism, she would have a talk with him. "Master, what are the benefits of becoming a monk?" Chu Qingyan asked. "It's not because of the benefits. It's because everything is empty. Greed, anger, obsession, and hatred are the 8 sufferings of life. Instead of being entangled in the world, it's better to enter Buddhism and cultivate one's body and mind," Su Jian said with a straight face. "No." Chu Qingyan raised her finger and shook her hand. "Oh? Female benefactor, what do you think?" Su Jian looked at her seriously. "Everything is empty? That's your pessimistic view. In your eyes, everything in the world is but an instant. Things remain, people change, and people change. It's like flowers blooming and withering. It's just going back and forth from the beginning to the end. There's no change. The only thing that changes is the shape of the flower, whether it blooms or withers. Although Chu Qingyan was smiling, the smile did not reach her eyes. She could see that Su Jian did not agree, so she could not help but narrow her eyes and continue. And in the eyes of us laymen, everything that happens in life is worth it. The people and things that we experience will leave a memory in our mind. Every time we think about it, it is very meaningful. I feel that you have misinterpreted my meaning, Su Jian said with a smile. Please enlighten me, Grandmaster. Chu Qingyan cupped her fists and said, because there is nowhere to go, the heart is born. All living beings will forever sink into the sea of bitterness. They will form evil karma and float in the sea of sin. At this point, Su Jian looked at her with merciful eyes. He closed his eyes and continued. To become a monk and pay respect to Buddha is to have a tranquil and peaceful life, to be free from greed and desires, and to have a tranquil and free heart. The so-called seeing through the world of mortals is not pessimistic, but more positive and optimistic. It's not to see through, but to see through. It's not to do nothing, but to do it in time. It's not to ask for nothing, but to be content with everything. Amitabha. Chu Qingyan had to admit that the young monk in front of her sat there quietly and peacefully. Just by looking at her with his eyes that were filled with great wisdom, he had an inexplicable power that made people feel at ease. If she were a bystander, she would have been convinced by him. Just him sitting there was an irrefutable argument. Unfortunately, he wanted to pull her into his trap and become a disciple of Buddhism. She could have just walked away, but his determined expression made her angry. If she did not argue with him, she was afraid that she would not be able to swallow this anger. Master, your attainments in Buddhism are very high. In Buddhism, Qingyan cannot argue with you, but Qingyan yearns to enjoy herself in the world of mortals, not to see through the world of mortals. I live in the world of mortals, and I like it. I like it. Sometimes I'm happy, and sometimes I'm unrestrained. I feel that life is unpredictable, which is surprising and interesting. If I really become a monk, my family will be far away, my friends will be far away, and I will be alone in my pursuit of Buddha. When I'm cold, no one will care for me. When I'm sick, no one will take care of me, and I'll die alone. In the face of Chu Qingyan's provocation and disrespect, Su Jian frowned slightly. Benefactress, becoming a monk is not the same as being alone. On the path of seeking Buddha, one's heart will not feel lonely. As a disciple of Buddhism, there is camaraderie and mutual support. You don't have to worry. If you enter Buddhism and take this poor monk as your master, this poor monk will definitely support you. As soon as he finished speaking, Su Jian saw her crafty eyes looking at him. Su Jian had a faint feeling of unease in his heart, but he heard her speak. Master, didn't you say that the 6 senses are pure and have no 7 emotions and 6 desires? You don't need emotions, but you feel pity for Qingyan. Don't you think that's already going against Buddhism? Chu Qingyan's bright eyes turned as she smiled back at him. Su Jian couldn't help but find it a little funny. She was beating around the bush to lure him into her trap. Although she was young, she was definitely smart. She had originally wanted to wait for him to be defeated, but unexpectedly, his eyes were smiling clearly. She knew that he had already seen through her intentions. The smile on Chu Qingyan's face froze, then she narrowed her eyes again. Then, to everyone's surprise, she waved her hand to call the waiter over. Dear customer, is there anything else you need? The waiter asked with a warm smile. Su Jian couldn't understand why Chu Qingyan had said such a good thing, so he quietly waited for her to speak. He saw Chu Qingyan reveal a sly smile, but it quickly disappeared. She said to the waiter in a clear voice, "Waiter, do you have pork jerky and beef jerky here?" "Yes, yes, yes. Not only that, we also have crispy chicken wings, specially made duck head, stir-fried duck gizzards." The waiter immediately began listing out his treasures. Okay. Give me everything you just said. Chu Qingyan waved her hand and said generously. The waiter immediately accepted the order happily and left. After Chu Qingyan finished giving her orders, she looked up and coincidentally saw Su Jian's frown. She couldn't help but be in a good mood. Soon, the dishes were placed one by one. Benefactress, what is the meaning of this? Su Jian looked at the table full of dishes and finally looked at her. If I enter Buddhism, can Qingyan still have a stomach full of food? Only people in the secular world can enjoy these dishes. Master, do you want to try a bite? She held out the chicken wing to tempt him. Su Jian only closed his eyes and recited, Amitabha. Buddha is merciful. Chu Qingyan chuckled and took a big bite before continuing. That's right. Master, what I want to say is that when a person lives, they must be happy when they are complacent. Don't let a golden goblet face the moon. Enjoy yourself when you are happy. When you are sad, laugh loudly. When you are sad, cry loudly. Don't want to live a dull life in vain. Perhaps you're right. I've seen through the world of mortals. My 6 senses are pure. No sorrow, no joy, no love, no hate. I won't be burdened by fame and fortune, won't be plagued by greed, anger, stupidity, and hate. But that is not the life Qingyan yearns for. Qingyan wants freedom. If I fall, I will get up again. I have never lost my desire for life, nor have I lost my despair for love. I am happy because of love and feel sorry for myself because of pain. I don't need Buddha to save me. I only need to save myself. Su Jian widened his eyes and watched her put down the teacup. Although her lips were stained with oil, her eyes were sparkling. He suddenly didn't know how to persuade her. At this moment, Turin, who had gone out at some point, returned. He said to Chu Qingyan, Lord is already at the door. He is waiting for us to go back together. Chapter 95. What? The big ice cube actually came to pick her up? This was simply too amazing. Chu Qingyan couldn't restrain her emotions and gave Su Jian an apologetic smile. Great master, someone from the residence is here. I have to go back first. If there's a chance in the future, I'll come back to discuss Buddhism. Su Jian knew that it would be difficult to convince her today, so he dismissed the idea. He put his palms together and said, Benefactress, please go ahead. Chu Qingyan nodded and then called the waiter over to settle the bill. The waiter giggled and declined, saying that it was the owner's honor to see great master Su Jian's rare patronage and so on. Chu Qingyan almost fell asleep listening to him. In short, she didn't have to pay for this meal. Thus, Chu Qingyan happily bid farewell to Su Jian and quickly led Xining and the others out of the door. Su Jian looked at the table full of meat and then glanced at the figure leaving with light steps. A faint trace of worry appeared on his face. Why do you want me to enter Buddhism? She had asked him earlier, but he hadn't answered her directly. Why do you want me to enter Buddhism? He couldn't answer this question. The Buddhist lotus blooms in the mud. If one's heart is pure, one will not be tainted. She was still young, but she was already in the mud. Whether she could emerge from the mud untainted, the answer would be revealed many years later. However, he couldn't bet the world on it. The divination showed that she would stir up a storm of blood in Sichuan and even the world. Apart from this, there was another tribulation. This tribulation was related to him. Su Jian stood up and walked out amidst the waiter's eager smiles. At the corner of the street, he looked at the small figure bouncing in front of the handsome man. Who would have guessed that this young and tender girl was his fiery phoenix? Su Jian retracted his gaze and turned around, refusing to leave. Big ice cube, big ice cube. Why are you here? Chu Qingyan put her hands behind her back and leaned forward. Her face was filled with the innocence of a child. Xiao Su's gaze peered through the gauze hat and landed on the noble figure leaving the street corner. He said casually, I just happened to pass by after court. Chu Qingyan choked. All right, reality was so cruel. She thought that he had specially come to pick her up. Xining saw her master's colorful expression and couldn't help but purse her lips and laugh. Her master was really stupid. If Lord hadn't specially come to pick her up, he would have directly gone home after court. Why would he wait for her at the door? After a moment of disappointment, Chu Qingyan regained her smile and followed behind him. Let's go home, then. I'm hungry. When Xiao Su heard her say that she was hungry, he turned to look at her. He glanced at Xi Ning, Tu Ling, and the others, then frowned. What did you play today? Why were his hands empty? He didn't buy anything. I strolled around and even went to drink flower tea. Lotus tea. It's not bad, but the store didn't charge me. Chu Qingyan thought back to today's trip and seriously replied. Xiao Su raised his eyebrows. Could it be that the Wang Fu didn't give her a monthly allowance, so she didn't buy anything? Even the tea she drank was treated by the store? He, the great lord of Sichuan country, couldn't even raise a child. If this got out, he would be a joke. He would have the steward give her a monthly allowance when he got back. His people could only be willful and squander money. They didn't have the right to wrong themselves. After Chu Qingyan finished replying, the person beside her didn't reply for a long time. She couldn't help but raise her head to look at him. It was a pity that he was wearing a veil, and she couldn't see his expression. She only knew that his gaze on her seemed to contain a trace of displeasure. She didn't know where she said the wrong thing. She couldn't help rubbing her nose and didn't make a sound. At this time, when they arrived in front of Xiao Su's carriage, there was a sudden gust of wind with the fragrance of a woman's rouge. Just as Chu Qingyan was wondering where this fragrance was coming from, a pleasant female voice came from the right side. His Royal Highness. It really is a coincidence. I didn't think that I would meet you here. This voice contained a bit of excitement, but it also hid a nervous surprise. Chu Qingyan heard this and stopped her steps. She looked towards the source of the voice and saw a woman wearing a dark green robe. She was accompanied by 2 servant girls as they walked over with light steps. When they came closer, Chu Qingyan couldn't help but sigh. What a beautiful woman with long eyebrows and a slight smile. At this time, she saw that her gaze was firmly on Xiao Su. Even if Chu Qingyan had never been in love, she could see that the woman in front of her liked Xiao Su. But Chu Qingyan was very curious. Xiao Su, this big block of ice, would take the initiative to strike up a conversation with a woman. Moreover, it was a woman as beautiful as a flower. How would he deal with it? Who are you? Xiao Su was a little surprised that he had been recognized outside, but he didn't take it to heart. He only looked at the person with a sharp gaze. As soon as he said this, Chu Qingyan clearly saw that the woman's expression changed slightly. She seemed to be a little frustrated, but she quickly returned to normal. With a smile, she said softly, "This little girl's surname is Yao, and my name is Ingrua. I am the granddaughter of the current Grand Tutor. Previously at the palace banquet, I met your highness a few times. It is normal that your highness doesn't remember this little girl. Today, this little girl saw the carriage of the King of England's residence and guessed that your highness was nearby. I didn't expect to see your highness appear when I turned around. I hope your highness doesn't mind." In just a few words, she introduced herself, led to the reason why they knew each other, and also explained why she was here. Chu Qingyan smacked her lips. This woman's eloquence wasn't bad. She knew when to advance and retreat. She didn't know what the big block of ice who was hit on would think. She was very curious. "Amen," Xiao Su indifferently replied. Yao Ingrua saw that the other party's tone was cold and that he was about to leave. She felt anxious and pursed her lips. She thought about how to break this awkward situation. Suddenly, she had an idea and her lips curled up. She took a step forward and curtsied. "Your Highness, Ingrua usually has nothing to do and likes to write poems. Would it be possible for me to have an opportunity to discuss it with your Highness?" This prince is not a civil official. Miss Xiao has found the wrong person. Xiao Su is still cold. Most people would politely respond to such a beautiful woman with both talent and appearance. Even if they weren't good enough, they would still say a few perfunctory words. However, Chu Qingyan didn't expect that the big block of ice would be so simple and direct. Yao Yingrua choked. Although she was a little hurt, she still persevered and didn't give up. Yingrua doesn't know martial arts. Otherwise, I would be able to discuss swords and sabers with your highness. I heard that your highness is stationed at the border all year round. I wonder if the scenery beyond the Great Wall is more spectacular and beautiful than the scenery in our capital city? Xiao Su frowned. This prince is fighting wars and protecting the country. This prince isn't enjoying life. I'm afraid that Miss Xiao has found the wrong person. Yao Yingrua's delicate body couldn't withstand his cold tone. Her face immediately paled. Talking to strangers was already his limit. If it wasn't for the fact that she was Grand Tutor Yao's grandson, he would have already left. The children at home don't starve. Forgive this prince for not being able to accompany you. After speaking, Xiao Su didn't wait for the other party to pass by. The children at home? Was he talking about her? Chu Qingyan blinked. At this moment, as if to verify her thoughts, Xiao Su stopped and turned around to look at her. His tone was impatient. Aren't you hungry? Hurry up. Oh, I'm coming. Chu Qingyan saw that Yao Yingrua's expression was a little ugly and immediately ran toward Xiao Su. Chapter 96. After climbing into the carriage, Chu Qingyan turned around to look at Yao Yingrua, who was standing by the roadside. She happened to meet Yao Yingrua's jealous gaze. Chu Qingyan shuddered. She clearly didn't do anything or say anything. She wasn't the one who rejected Yao Yingrua, so why did Yao Yingrua hate her? Could it be that she was staring at the wrong person? Chu Qingyan didn't think much of it and slipped into the carriage. She just happened to meet Xiao Su's gaze. At this moment, Xiao Su had already taken off his veil, revealing his deep, dark eyes. Chu Qingyan guffawed, probably because he was impatient with her speed. She quickly sat down in front of him. The wheels rolled and left in front of Yao Yingrua. Yao Yinrua's maidservant, Tao Hong, said indignantly, "That King of England is too rude." Miss spoke to him so nicely, but he didn't know what was good for him. He's just a lord who has fallen out of favor, yet he dares to give Miss a hard time. You're not allowed to say that. Yao Yinrua angrily glared at the maidservant. What do you know? The King of England is a famous general. It's normal for him to be arrogant.
Besides, he only forgot about me.
As long as I appear in front of him more often in the future, he will definitely remember me. Tao Hong immediately lowered her head and begged for mercy. Miss, this servant knows her mistake. On the other hand, the other servant girl, Lu Yi, had a fawning smile as she said, Young miss, don't worry. With your celestial beauty and innate talent, you will definitely make King Ying treat you differently. These words made Yao Yingrua's heart burst with joy. Her battered mood recovered quite a bit. Then, her eyes were filled with shyness and a hint of determination. I will definitely make King Ying treat me differently. She was the eldest granddaughter of the imperial tutor's concubine. Her family was prominent, her appearance wasn't bad, and she was famous for her talent. How was she not worthy of him? With such pride, Yao Yinrua coldly looked at the carriage. Chu Qingyan, is it? What is she? How can she be worthy of His Highness? What a joke. That's right. Tao Hong and Lu Yi agreed. The carriage gradually moved further and further away. Yao Yingrua turned around and left with the two maids. At this moment, Chu Qingyan was sitting upright and still with her hands on her knees. From time to time, she would turn the pearl and secretly size up the person in front of her. Xiao Su couldn't ignore her burning gaze even if he didn't want to. In the end, he simply put down the book and stared at the person in front of him who wanted to look away. If you want to ask, then ask. Chu Qingyan chuckled. Her serious face suddenly changed into a gossipy one. Your Highness, what do you think of that woman just now? This prince didn't notice. Xiao Su didn't expect her to ask this and raised his brows. Oh, then does your Highness treat strangers like this? Chu Qingyan continued. Something like that, Xiao Su replied calmly. When Chu Qingyan heard this, she tilted her head and her posture wasn't as serious as before. She asked curiously, Your Highness, you're about to reach the age of 20. Do you have any close female friends or a woman that you like? Xiao Su's gaze immediately became impatient. You're so young, yet you don't ask about the 4 books and 5 classics. Instead, you're asking for a beating? The person in front of her suddenly changed from being a big ice cube to being a strict father. This made Chu Qingyan a little uncomfortable. However, after being together for a long time, she also knew that he wouldn't hit her. Thus, her courage grew and she immediately leaned over and hugged his arm. Her voice was cute and naive as she said, I'm just curious. Don't try to change the topic. Xiao Su was instantly angry and amused. When did he give her the courage to come over? When he was unhappy. If it was his subordinates, they would have already kept a respectful distance. How could they be like her, who didn't know what was good for her? However, because of her clinginess, he didn't feel so impatient. Nothing? Chu Qingyan's eyes lit up. Nothing? You don't have a close female friend or a girl you like? Faced with the person beside him who wanted a yard after getting an inch, Xiao Su felt a headache coming on. Neither? Xiao Su pulled his hand out of her arms and lazily leaned against the pillow as he replied indifferently. Why? Chu Qingyan expressed her surprise. Xiao Su frowned because of her tone. What's so strange about that? Ben Wang is always outside, protecting the country. I don't have the heart for these romantic affairs. Chu Qingyan instantly widened her eyes. But when soldiers are outside, don't they have many girls to serve them? When she finished speaking, Xiao Su narrowed his eyes and looked at her sternly. Is this something a girl should know? Who told you these things? Xiao Su was enraged. She was a pure and innocent young lady, yet she actually knew about the filthy affairs of the military prostitutes. If he knew who had been whispering these things to her, he would definitely punish them severely. Chu Qingyan rarely saw him angry, so she immediately felt the entire carriage freeze. In order to stop the cold air from spreading, she bravely threw herself at him and hugged his arm. She giggled. No one taught me. I just heard it from outside. In the future, don't listen to other people's nonsense. Xiao Su didn't reject her approach, and the cold air dissipated a lot, but his tone was still stern. Yes, Your Highness. Chu Qingyan immediately raised her hand and placed it beside her temple, looking very obedient and obedient. Although Xiao Su didn't know what she meant by this action, he felt that she looked funny and cute. Moreover, when these words came out of her mouth, his heart softened. Feeling that the big ice block was no longer angry, Chu Qingyan continued on her path of gossip. If she were to evaluate her actions at that time, there were only a few words that were suitable for her. If she didn't do it, she wouldn't have died. Then, Your Highness, in the future, when you are in the capital, those women who admire you will take the opportunity to get to know you. Perhaps you will be able to find a woman to spend the rest of your life with. Chu Qingyan blinked her eyes. She had already completely forgotten her own identity. She simply felt that the big ice block, who sacrificed his own happiness for the country, should be blessed by the heavens. Although she had heard many bad rumors about him before, after interacting with him for real, she found that the rumors were wrong. The big ice block was a rare and precious man. Xiao Su closed his eyes and rested. He didn't care and said, Not interested. Why not? Chu Qingyan didn't understand. Could it be that she didn't have the potential to be a matchmaker? Women are too annoying. When Xiao Su thought of those beautiful women, he was a bit annoyed. Chu Qingyan thought of something in shock. She had heard the servants say that the big ice block never approached women. Then did he have something that was hard to say? Or was he interested in men? Heavens, this news was too shocking. There was no more chatter in his ears. Xiao Su seemed to have thought of something. He opened his eyes and looked at her with a smile that wasn't a smile. Yatu, don't forget your identity. What identity can I have? Chu Qingyan didn't react. You are the King of England's imperial consort personally bestowed by the Emperor. So, it's enough for this king to raise a little princess consort. Xiao Su continued to close his eyes to rest, ignoring the other's excitement. But I'm still a child. This king isn't in a hurry. What does this have to do with you being in a hurry? Also, why did the conversation turn to this topic? Chu Qingyan wanted to cry, but no tears came out. One didn't understand romance, the other didn't know anything about romance. So the two of them talked like chickens and ducks, but they were harmonious.
Who said that?
If you like a person, it's best to start from a baby. Chapter 97. They chatted all the way back to the King of England's residence. The servants came to lead the carriage, but they saw Chu Qingyan in their lord's carriage. Everyone was shocked. The lord had actually personally gone to pick up the young princess consort. Lord, young princess consort. The servants immediately bowed respectfully. Ever since the lord had offended the popular people of the inner courtyard, Hong Yi and Zi, for Chu Qingyan, the onlookers finally understood that this Chu Qingyan was extremely favored by the lord. They could offend anyone, but they could not offend this little ancestor. Thus, everyone changed the way they addressed her. Chu Qingyan also changed from 9th Miss Chu to young princess consort. This form of address represented that Chu Qingyan's identity was recognized. However, Chu Qingyan did not feel anything. She only felt that the 3 words young princess consort were shorter and easier to call than her name. Once they got off the carriage, Xiao Su walked in front with large strides. When Chu Qingyan steadied herself, he was already far away. Thus, she lifted her skirt and chased after him. Wait for me. Xiao Su ignored her. The young princess consort actually dared to make the lord wait for her? Servant A covered his eyes, waiting for the lord to get angry. "Oh, my feet." Xiao Su stopped in his tracks when he heard the sound. He turned around and saw her smiling triumphantly. The young princess consort actually dared to trick the lord? Servant B covered his eyes, waiting for the lord to get angry. Big ice cube, you walked too fast. I almost couldn't keep up. Chu Qingyan ran in front of him and complained. The young princess consort actually dared to complain about the lord. Servant C covered his eyes, waiting for the lord to get angry. Xiao Su glanced at her. Your physical fitness is too poor. Chu Qingyan widened her eyes. He actually despised her physical fitness. Her legs weren't as long as his, and she was still a girl, okay? Seeing that Xiao Su was about to turn around and leave, Chu Qingyan immediately squatted down and hugged her calf. It hurts. I walked too fast. The injury seems to be acting up again. Xiao Su looked at her suspiciously. You hurt this leg? Chu Qingyan looked down and realized that she had hugged the wrong leg. She decisively changed to another leg and then looked up at him pitifully. Xiao Su thought it was funny, but he seemed to compromise a little. He walked up to her, grabbed her with both hands, and threw her on his back. Hold on tight. Understood. One was cold. One of them was pretending to be obedient after getting a bargain. When the servants released their fingers and saw this scene, their eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets. Did the sun rise from the west? Is it raining red? Snow in June? Otherwise, were they dreaming? I have a donkey, but I never ride it. One day, I rode it to the market on a whim. I had a whip in my hand. Shut up. Oh, okay. The sun shines in the sky. The flowers smile at me. The birds say good morning. Why are you carrying a bag of explosives? If you sing again, I'll throw you down. Understood. Xiao Su's eyes twitched. What was wrong with him just now? Why did he become so soft-hearted and carry this burden? In the study room in the middle of the night, Xiao Su sat behind the desk, half of his body hidden in the darkness. Today, 9th Miss Chu visited a rouge powder stall, a porcelain stall, a handmade toy stall. Turin reported everything in detail. Xiao Su tapped his fingers on the table and listened quietly. Then, she met the eldest son of the Fu family, Fu Onlai, who was beating up an orphan girl. Ninth Miss Chu stood up to protect her, Turin said disapprovingly. Xiao Su said lightly, "Continue." Then, Master Su Jian appeared and stopped Fu Onlai. Ninth Miss Chu invited him to the tea house, but Turin paused hesitantly. "But what?" Xiao Su looked up at him. But Master Su Jian actually wanted to persuade Ninth Miss Chu to shave her head and become a monk. Turin reported truthfully. Xiao Su's fingers stopped tapping on the table. He frowned and said, "Become a monk?" Turin nodded and reported the battle of words between the two of them in the tea house. After listening, Xiao Su's lips curled into a smile. As expected of one of his men, his eloquence could even make Su Jian dizzy. However, his smile quickly disappeared. He took this matter to heart. If it had been someone else, he would have ignored it. However, this person was Su Jian. He would not bring up this matter for no reason. Seeing that Lord was deep in thought, Turin stood still. After a while, Xiao Su came back to his senses and said casually, "You seem to have a problem with Qingyan?" Turin thought that he had concealed it well, but his master must have noticed something from the way he addressed her. He did not deny it and nodded. "Master, it's not that I have a problem with her, but I can't treat her as the future mistress of the prince's residence." Xiao Su looked at him lightly. "Her status has already been determined. You have to do it even if you can't." Turin sensed that his master was protecting her in his words. Although he resisted, he still agreed. "I understand." Knowing that he was upset, Xiao Su said, "She is the King of England's imperial consort, appointed by the retired emperor himself. If someone finds out about this, it will be considered disobeying the imperial edict. You know the consequences." Turin immediately understood that Lord was afraid that someone would take the opportunity to make trouble. He immediately bowed and said, "I didn't think it through. I won't do it again." Xiao Su waved his hand and dismissed him. He sat quietly in the study for a while, his body covered in the frost of the night. Then, he slowly walked out of the study and passed by Chu Qingyan's room, entering it out of habit. Chu Qingyan was still awake. Hearing his footsteps, she got up and looked at him apologetically. "Big Ice Cube, there's something I need to tell you. I seem to have caused you trouble." "About Fu Onlai?" Chu Qingyan, who was thinking about how to tell him, was surprised. "You know about it?" "Yes, it's nothing. Go to sleep." Xiao Su covered her with the blanket. Chu Qingyan forced herself to stay awake. She had wanted to talk to him about this matter, and since it had been resolved, she could finally relax and sleep. Xiao Su took a look at her sleeping face and got up to leave. There were too many grudges with the Fu family, this one did not make a difference. Ever since Xiao Su stopped restricting her freedom, Chu Qingyan was like a bird that had been released from its cage, flying everywhere. One day, the weather was good, and she wanted to go out to play. She had wanted to ask Xiao Su to go out with her, but he had disappeared early in the morning. So Chu Qingyan dismissed the idea and went back to her room to change. She happened to run into Hong Yi in the corridor. Ever since Big Ice Cube punished Hong Yi because of Z, she rarely saw Hong Yi. She greeted Hong Yi embarrassedly. After all, she was the cause of the incident. Hong Yi did not seem to be affected by what had happened and replied politely, "Are you going out?" Chu Qingyan nodded. Then she thought of something and asked with a smile, "Does the Fu have men's clothing of my age?" Hong Yi shook her head awkwardly. "This servant does not have any on hand, but this servant can ask Xingyi. She usually takes care of these clothes." This servant remembers that Lord did not wear some clothes when he was young. If Xiao Wang Fei does not mind, this servant can take them out and use them. Why would I mind? This is already very good. Chu Qingyan said. So Hong Yi asked a servant to ask Xingyi. The servant quickly came back. Xingyi Jiejie said, "She does not have any." Hong Yi frowned. "Tell Xingyi to come over and reply." The servant immediately left. After a while, Cheng Yi's sharp voice came from afar. Hong Ijie, why did you call me over in such a hurry? Chapter 98. Cheng Yi sauntered over. When she saw Chu Qingyan and Hong Yi standing together, jealousy flashed through her eyes. Then she smiled and curtsied to Chu Qingyan. Greetings to little Wang Fei. Chu Qingyan felt that this voice made the hairs on her body stand on end. She grinned slightly in response. She always felt that this Cheng Yi was strange, and she still couldn't escape this feeling today. Hong Yi said with a smile, I called you here for another matter. Aren't you in charge of Lord's daily clothes? Little Wang Fei wants to go out and play. Maybe it's not very convenient to wear women's clothes, so she wants to find some men's clothes. I remember that Lord has several sets of clothes from when he was young that he hasn't worn. I wanted you to take them out for little Wang Fei. So, it's this matter. That servant didn't say it clearly, so I didn't understand. He does have them. After Cheng Yi finished speaking to Hong Yi, she turned and smiled at Chu Qingyan. Little Wang Fei, it's that servant's fault for not doing a good job. This servant will go find them for you. Thank you for your trouble, Cheng Yi Jie. Chu Qingyan obediently responded. Cheng Yi walked towards the clothing pavilion. The moment she turned, the smile on her face turned into a vicious expression. She unwillingly went to get the clothes. After Cheng Yi got the clothes, Chu Qingyan thanked her and then returned to her room with Xining. Seeing Chu Qingyan leave, Cheng Yi dropped her fake smile and said to the person beside her, Don't you feel that she's gaining a foothold in the Wangfu? Hong Yi smiled slightly. She's the future mistress. It's normal for her to gain a foothold. Cheng Yi snorted coldly. But you didn't notice that Lord is becoming more and more attentive to her. What do you think she has that Lord will treat her differently? Hong Yi looked at her with confusion in her eyes. Maybe little Wang Fei has the ability to make Lord treat her differently. Why are you in such a hurry? Being asked by Hong Yi, Cheng Yi almost choked. Only you can swallow this. I won't allow such a lowly woman to climb to the highest position in the Wangfu. Hong Yi frowned. Cheng Yi, don't say that. If this reaches Lord's ears, I'm afraid you. Hong Yi didn't finish, but the two knew what the outcome would be. However, Cheng Yi gave a fake smile. Hong Ijie, I'll only say this to you. You won. You won't disregard our sisterly relationship and report me to Lord. Hong Yi sighed softly. Cheng Yi, you've been unable to control your mouth since you were young. Of course, I won't say it, but you shouldn't go around spreading it. Otherwise, even I won't be able to protect you. Cheng Yi chuckled with a hint of self-mockery. Hong Ijie, do you think that after Chu Qingyan stabilizes that position, there will still be a place for us? Hong Yi frowned slightly. Cheng Yi didn't wait for her to reply and continued. Do you still not understand Ziyi's situation? This Chu Qingyan is still young, but her schemes are not shallow. If it wasn't for her indulgence, would Ziyi have been taken back to be re-educated in less than 3 days? And because of this, you have lost face in front of Lord. I think this is just the beginning. As long as she has a certain amount of power, the first people she will get rid of are us 7 maidservants. Hong Ijie, you should also make plans early so that you don't end up in a bad situation. Cheng Yi sighed, left a meaningful look, and then turned to leave. Hong Yi thoughtfully looked at Cheng Yi's departing figure, then revealed a faint smile. Cheng Yi wanted her to be the one to stand out, so she was trying to make her look bad. If she made the first move, she might be able to help her get rid of Chu Qingyan, this thorn in her side. But she wasn't an impulsive 15- or 16-year-old girl who could be intimidated by others. Hong Yi smiled and slowly left, as if nothing had happened. She didn't need to get involved in this muddy water. Chu Qingyan naturally didn't know what the 2 maidservants said after she left. After she returned to her room and changed her clothes, she felt that they fit her very well. She heard that these were the clothes that Big Ice Cube wore when he was 6 or 7 years old. Chu Qingyan looked at her own 10-year-old body and suddenly felt infuriated. She comforted herself that boys and girls grew up differently. She developed late, not underdeveloped. After comforting herself, Chu Qingyan pulled Xining out of the room. This time, the one waiting for her outside the door wasn't Turin but Hualing. When Hualing saw Chu Qingyan come out dressed as a man, his eyes lit up. Such a beautiful young man. Faced with Chu Qingyan's wide eyes, Hualing came back to his senses. He gave a few soft coughs and said unnaturally, "Little princess, Turin isn't feeling well, so let Hualing come over to serve." Chu Qingyan looked at him suspiciously. Last time when father came, Hualing seemed to have used this excuse to trick Turin into guarding the study. Hualing didn't know that Chu Qingyan had seen through the back and forth between him and Turin. His heart was filled with resentment. Didn't he just scheme against Turin once? This time, he was tricked by him with the same excuse from before. Towards Turin, Chu Qingyan clearly had a much better impression of Hualing. At least Hualing was kind to her on the surface. Also, he and her father had a strong affection for each other before. Although this was just her own guess, it shouldn't be wrong. "Let's go, Hualing Darren," Chu Qingyan said to him with a playful smile, just like a child. Hualing's eyes twitched. He was a first-class fierce cavalry expert by the Lord's side. How could he suddenly be reduced to a little girl's manservant? In the words of old Master Chu, it was one thought to go to heaven, and one thought to go to hell. But this was the task given by the Lord. He and Turin did not dare to slack off. So, no matter how proud he was of his identity, he could only be a follower right now. But what was worth consoling was that the person he was protecting was not low in status. At least, she was their future little princess, although it might be temporary. So the group of people went out again. A few days ago, after studying the tourist route of the capital, it should be said that it was a list of interesting scenic spots. Chu Qingyan decided to go to the street by the East Gate this time. She heard that there were many strange things there. If she liked to hunt for novelty, she could go there for a walk. Thus, Chu Qingyan led her men and headed straight for the eastern city gate. At this time, a purple-clothed figure swept over the high wall and quickly moved on the street. "Young master, that person is chasing after us," the black-clothed man beside him reported. The purple-clothed man frowned slightly. His charming eyes flashed with a strange light, faintly revealing his displeasure. "You bring 3 people to distract her. I don't want to see her." "Understood." The subordinates immediately received the order and quickly left. At this time, the purple-clothed man narrowed his phoenix eyes and randomly chose a direction. He lightly tapped his toes and jumped over. And that direction was also the East Gate. Chapter 99. Hualing, what do you think of this thing? Chu Qingyan felt that she had a good relationship with the people by Big Ice Cube's side, so she took out a hat and asked him. Hualing's eyes had been looking around the entire time. Hearing the little princess call him, he turned around and his lips twitched. "This green hat? Good looking." Hualing insincerely replied. "Really?" Chu Qingyan revealed a smile and instantly stuffed the thing into his chest. "I'll give it to you if you like it. No need to be polite." Hualing's eyes widened as he looked at the hat in his chest. Who would wear a green hat for no reason? Wouldn't they be laughed at by others? Then again, he didn't have a family yet, so wasn't the little princess cursing him? Chu Qingyan threw her hand at him and didn't care about him anymore. She was still looking for treasures, and when she finished, she turned around to find Hualing holding the hat frozen in place. She curiously asked, "Hualing, you don't like it?" "I think it's pretty good. In the summer, yellow, pink, and green are very eye-catching and comfortable to look at. If you wear these colors on the road, you'll definitely attract the attention of many girls." It would attract many gazes, but that wasn't admiration, but rather sneering disdain. "All right, little princess?" But this was a gift from the little princess, so even if it was gold thread, he had to swallow it. I like it, I like it, I like it a lot. He liked it so much that he wanted to die. So, Huoling held the green hat and wanted to cry. This was the first gift Huoling received from the little princess. It really was a day worth remembering. A green hat. Along the way, Chu Qingyan bought many things for herself and the servants by her side, as well as some things for Big Ice Cube. But when she wanted to buy something else for Huoling, he had a face that said he didn't want it. Chu Qingyan instantly curled her lips. It was rare for her to come out, and Big Ice Cube gave her a lot of silver, saying that she could get more from the steward if it wasn't enough. She wanted to buy some things for the people by her side, but it was a pity that Huoling didn't appreciate it. Forget it. She would just buy it for herself. Along the way, they arrived at the gathering place. People came and went, shoulder to shoulder, and it was very lively. Huoling, who had been paying attention to the surroundings, suddenly saw two black figures flash by on the roof. He narrowed his eyes and gave orders to the palace's guards before silently following them. It was rare for Chu Qingyan and Xining to come out to play, so they didn't pay attention to their surroundings. In addition, it was crowded with people, so they didn't notice that someone was missing. When Chu Qing picked up a mask and turned around to ask for the opinion of the people around him, he discovered that Xining, Huoling, and the others had already disappeared. Behind them was a stream of strangers. Huoling, Xining, Chu Qingyan called out a few times, but no one responded. Chu Qingyan raised her brows. Where did everyone go? At this moment, the stall owner asked, "Little prince, do you still want this mask?" Chu Qingyan turned around when she heard this. She raised the mask in her hand and replied with a smile, "I want this mask. Give me that mask too." She pointed at another mask. The stall owner agreed with a smile. After Chu Qingyan paid the money, she took the golden boy and jade girl masks and turned around to look for the missing people. But after looking for a while, she couldn't find a single person. Chu Qingyan couldn't help but frown. Perhaps they were also looking for her while she was looking for them. How about she just wait for them here? Otherwise, what would she do if she got lost? After making up her mind, Chu Qingyan decided to find a safe corner and wait for them to find her. However, just as she took a step forward, a few children rushed towards her. The one in front knocked right into her waist and she staggered a few steps back. The golden mask in her hand was knocked away, and it spun in midair before flying towards the entrance of a small alley. Chu Qingyan held her waist and looked at the naughty children with a helpless expression. Then she walked towards the alley. It was really when one was unlucky. Even walking on the road would cause one to be hit. Chu Qingyan had just picked up her mask and was about to blow away the dust on it when she heard a strange gust of wind coming from the quiet alley. Her heart skipped a beat. In novels, quiet alleys were the best places to kill and rob. Could it be that she had coincidentally bumped into one of them? Then she had to run quickly. She grabbed the mask tightly and didn't dare to look back. She pretended to be calm and walked back the way she came. Suddenly, the alley wind mixed with an inexplicable chill hit her. She felt a chill on her back. When she wanted to run, she couldn't break free from a force that hugged her waist. She widened her eyes and wanted to shout. The person seemed to have sensed her intention and covered her mouth with a hand. Her body stuck close to the person behind her, and with a spin, she flew up and landed on a sycamore tree nearby. The person holding her captive casually found a branch to sit down, and she sat in his arms with her back leaning against him. The dense leaves of the sycamore tree blocked her figure. From this angle, she could see the person below, but the person below couldn't see the person hiding here. Chu Qingyan's heart almost jumped to her throat. But she felt that although the person behind her was holding her hostage, he didn't do any harm to her. She calmed down a little. At this time, 3 or 4 figures appeared at the alley's entrance. The leader was a woman in red. Where is he? I clearly saw him coming here. How could he disappear in the blink of an eye? The woman in red was flustered and exasperated. "Miss, young Master Daunting always comes and goes without a trace. This time we are so close. I'm afraid he will run away even more. The maid in black beside the woman in red immediately said. It was so difficult to find him, but he ran away again. It's so annoying. Next time I will catch him. The woman in red stomped her feet and angrily turned to leave with her people. Chu Qingyan's eyes widened as she looked at the scene beneath the tree. After the red-robed lady and her entourage had left, she realized that the hand that was holding her loosened. The person behind her was also not as tense as before. He seemed to have relaxed. At this time, Chu Qingyan heard the person behind her murmur, I finally got rid of this evil woman. The voice was charming, like a night elf singing in a low voice. Chu Qingyan sighed inwardly. What an elegant and magnetic voice. Since it was to get rid of people, it shouldn't be a threat to her. Chu Qingyan moved her body. The person behind her saw that and loosened his grip on her. Chu Qingyan wanted to turn her head, but suddenly stopped. What if she saw his real face? What if he became angry and killed her? So Chu Qingyan turned her back to him and said, Hero, can you send me down? Because she was disguised as a man, she called herself me. Hero? The person behind her repeated these two words with interest. It was the first time he was called a hero. He seemed to be very amused. He leaned close to her ear and chuckled. This young master is not a hero, but a demon. Demons only do bad things. So, I'm only responsible for sending you up, not sending you down. His playful words made Chu Qingyan's shoulders stiffen, and the fragrance of the flowers was somewhat familiar. Chapter 100. Chu Qingyan didn't have time to think about the floral fragrance. She only felt that this person was so overbearing and rude. She said somewhat angrily, Since that's the case, then I'll go down myself. Chu Qingyan was too lazy to waste her breath with him. She looked down at the parasol tree that was at least 2 stories tall and swallowed her saliva. She hugged the tree trunk with both hands and was about to slide down. The person behind her didn't seem to expect her to do this. He raised his eyebrows and lifted her up, placing her back on the branch. Chu Qingyan only felt the world spin, and then she was changed in another direction. When she opened her eyes, she saw the person in front of her. When she saw the person clearly, she was stunned. His eyes were elegant, and his lips were bright and alluring. Wearing a purple robe, coupled with those devilish phoenix eyes and charming temperament, he was simply an evildoer. The jade pool was second to none, and his zifu was unparalleled. She couldn't help but think of a poem. There was a beauty in the north, peerless and independent. A glance could topple a city, and another glance could topple a country. But when she saw that there was an Adam's apple on that smooth neck, she instantly widened her eyes. So this wasn't a beauty, but an evildoer youth. Recalling that someone had called him young Master Dongding, she finally recovered from the shock of the beauty being a man. Higashio Motetsu, who had long been accustomed to being stared at like this, raised his eyebrows. He put his hands behind his head and leaned against the tree trunk. He lazily said to her, If you want to cripple your leg, then jump. This young master won't stop you. Chu Qingyan was stunned for a moment. Then she looked at the person in front of her. This one has no grievances with you. It's this one's bad luck to be held hostage by you. If young master is willing to send this one down, then we won't owe each other anything today. If we meet again in the future, we'll go our separate ways. What does young master think? When Higashio Motetsu heard this, he finally looked at the youth in front of him. He was fearless in the face of danger and moved with reason and emotion. It really didn't seem like the intelligence and rationality that a 10-year-old child should have. Red lips, white teeth, and fair makeup. It had to be said that the youth in front of him had a likable face. Higashio Motetsu playfully teased her, What if I'm not willing? The smile on Chu Qingyan's face stiffened, then she became angry. You don't want me to go down, and you don't want to send me down. What do you want to do? What I don't want to do is being willful. Higashio Motetsu. She didn't know when he had taken the mask, but He didn't to her face, revealing his charming phoenix eyes as his face. Her tis tea to twos, she to reason to the points to, and not to waste her to speak. She also closed her eyes and leaned against the tree, likes, to stop speak. He to her to stop, he twos to he tests that he and then he to be mocked her.
Twos.
He to she, he. To bees to be town-ed by himself, too. Don't tell me you don't want to go down? Chu Qingyan crossed her arms and looked at him.
So, what if I talk?
So, what if I don't talk? Don't tell me you'll let me go down if I talk to you for a bit? That's not impossible. Higashio Motetsu took off the mask on his face and smiled evilly. Chu Qingyan didn't want to bother with him. Maybe this person was bored to death and wanted to tease her. As long as she ignored him, he would feel bored and leave. Seeing Chu Qingyan's silence, Higashio Motetsu suddenly felt that this youth was really interesting. It was rare to see such a cute youth in Sichuan. Just as he was about to tease her again, he suddenly heard a few calls from below. Miss, Master. Hearing this voice, Chu Qingyan knew that Xining and the others had come to look for her. She immediately wanted to open her mouth and say that she was on the tree, but a hand suddenly appeared out of nowhere and covered her mouth. Her hands were locked behind her back, and the cold book cover couldn't suppress her anger. She angrily glared at the person in front of her and said to him with her eyes, "What do you want to do?" "Fun, willful." He answered her with his lips. When Chu Qingyan understood his lips, she was furious, but she knew that she couldn't do anything to him. At this time, Xining's voice had gradually faded away. Perhaps because she didn't respond, he thought that she wasn't here and went somewhere else to look for her. So, at this time, Chu Qingyan simply ignored him. Higashio Motetsu felt those soft lips against his palm, bringing about an itch. He restrained himself and saw that those people had gone far away before he released his grip on her. His eyes looked at her playfully. "You're a girl?" Although it was a question, his tone was certain. "So what if I am? So what if I'm not?" Chu Qingyan indifferently replied. "Nothing much." Higashio Motetsu lazily leaned against the tree trunk, his hand still playing with her mask. He then looked up at her and asked with a teasing smile, "Little girl, why don't you follow this young master and travel freely?" Chu Qingyan tightly clung to the tree trunk behind her, looking at him with a vigilant expression. Seeing that Chu Qingyan was like a hedgehog with spikes all over her body, Higashio Motetsu suddenly smiled, like a rose blooming on a white jade wall, dazzling and frightening. "What are you afraid of? It's not like I want to eat you." The more he said, the worse it got. Chu Qingyan looked into his eyes and said disdainfully, "Follow by your side and be your servant girl? Eat and sleep in the open? Be hunted down all day long?" Higashio Motetsu seemed to have heard a funny thing, as he gave a low laugh and then clarified, "Following by my side, even if you have the identity of a servant girl, you'll have a more comfortable life than a young miss of an aristocratic family. Eating and sleeping in the open is impossible. You'll only have a table full of fine wine and a table full of delicacies. Things like being hunted down will only happen occasionally." Chu Qingyan didn't know if what he said was true or false, but to her, it didn't matter. She met his devilish phoenix eyes and said clearly, "This little girl still prefers a peaceful and steady life. Many thanks for young master's good intentions." Higashio Motetsu saw that this little girl was stubborn and felt that it was even more interesting. But seeing that it was getting late, he raised his hand and pinched her pink cheeks. "Forget it. I'll take it that you have eyes but can't see gold and jade." Chu Qingyan felt that this person's touch was really annoying. Just as she was about to slap his hand away, she fell into his embrace and jumped down from the tree. When she steadied herself, that person had already left. "Little girl, if fate wills it, we'll meet again." Chu Qingyan turned around and only had time to see that person's back facing her as he shook the mask in his hand. Then, with a stomp of his feet, he turned into a purple wind and disappeared into the sea of people. Chu Qingyan pinched the jade maiden mask in her hand, feeling somewhat indignant. What a strange person. She hoped that they wouldn't meet again until they died of old age. But who knows, when you want to find a person, you won't be able to find them even if you climb over mountains. And when you don't want to see a person, you'll meet them wherever you go. However, many years later, that person's hand caressed the golden maiden mask, his expression complex yet gentle. When the golden wind and the jade do meet, it will surpass countless people in the human world. Chapter 101. When Chu Qingyan walked out of the small alley, she didn't know which direction to go to find Xining and the others, but she heard someone loudly calling out her name. She turned around and saw Xiao Ran standing in the sea of people. He was dressed in a blue robe of good quality, which made his handsome face look even fairer and clearer. After not seeing him for so many days, this brat had grown quite a bit. Seeing him, she couldn't help thinking of the description of Baoyu in a famous book in high school. Face like the moon in mid-autumn, color like the flowers of spring, hair like a knife, eyebrows like ink, face like a peach petal, eyes like autumn waves. She sighed in her heart. When this person grows up, he will definitely be a young girl killer. Looking at him now, he already has the capital to bring disaster to others. When Xiaoran saw that it was really her, he quickly walked over to her and put his hands on her shoulders. He carefully looked her up and down, and when he saw that she was fine, he heaved a sigh of relief. Chu Qingyan was confused by his strange appearance. What's wrong? Xiaoran saw that she still had a blank and fearless appearance, so his face immediately became serious. He reprimanded her. Do you not bring your brain with you when you go out? Do you not know your own status? You came out to play, and you didn't even let the guards follow you closely. If this prince didn't find you, where would you be wandering around? Her heart was already a bit shaken from being inexplicably held hostage, and now she was inexplicably angered by someone. Xiao Ren often brought up her low status to talk about things, so no matter how good Chu Qingyan's temper was, she couldn't handle what happened today. Her face immediately turned cold. If something happens to me, I don't need the fourth prince to worry. I know my own status, so there's no need for the prince to remind me again and again. Perhaps Chu Qingyan's tone was too harsh, but the moment she finished speaking, Xiao Ran, who was standing in front of her, was stunned. Chu Qingyan was vexed. It seemed like she had not cultivated well enough and could not hide her temper. Xiao Ran was also confused because of his concern. He also regretted that he didn't control his temper. Looking at the youth in front of him, his eyes were filled with self-blame. Don't be angry. I only said that because I was anxious. Don't take my words to heart. Chu Qingyan was about to apologize, but saw that he was a step ahead of her to reflect. Chu Qingyan suddenly felt a bit uncomfortable in her heart. She thought of the previous 2 times Xiao Ran, as a Sichuan prince, would always inexplicably encounter some danger. So he was so cautious. It was because he treated her as a friend that he scolded her, worried that something would happen to her. Fourth prince, Qingyan is also wrong. Please don't take it to heart. Seeing her soften her tone, Xiao Ran's heart relaxed. He waved his hand. Forget it. Forget it. Let's not talk about this. That's right. Why are you here? If I didn't go to the king's palace and heard that you came out to play and wanted to try my luck to find you, but I met Xining and Hualing who were looking for you, I wouldn't have known that you were lost. Tell me, if I didn't find you first, wouldn't you be crying? Chu Qingyan rolled her eyes at him. Do you think I'm an idiot? If I can't find the way, I can't ask people. With a mouth under my nose, I could have found the king's palace by asking people. Who would be stupid enough to wait until the sky turned dark? Xiao Ran felt that she was right, so he ordered a servant to report his safety to Hualing and the others. Then he walked side by side with Chu Qingyan. Is there anywhere else you want to play? Xiao Ran looked at the bustling crowd, and his interest was piqued. After experiencing everything that happened today, Chu Qingyan was no longer in the mood, but seeing Xiao Ran's excited face, she felt that it wouldn't be good to ruin his mood. After all, he had come here to find her.
What about you?
What do you want to play? Chu Qingyan tilted her head and asked him. Xiao Ran shook his head in a daze. Although I grew up in the capital, I am completely unfamiliar with this place because Imperial Mother never let me leave the palace to play. She said that the people outside are sinister. The few times I sneaked out was to find you and eldest brother in the king's palace to play. As for other places, I've heard of them, but I've never seen them before. Chu Qingyan suddenly felt that it wasn't that easy to be a prince. Xiao Ran and Xiao Su were also like this. One was like a golden canary that was locked up in a magnificent palace, and the other was exiled to fight on the battlefield since he was young. Thinking of this, she sent a look of sympathy to Xiao Ran, but she did not expect him to be sharp enough to notice it. He protested the entire way. Take back your eyes like you're looking at a puppy. Otherwise, do you believe that I won't dig out your eyeballs and make them into skewers? Chu Qingyan did not believe his outwardly strong words. She pointed at the Tonghulu skewers and asked, Does the fourth prince want to eat that?
What is that?
Xiao Ran's eyes were instantly attracted, and he forgot what he wanted to say before. Tonghulu, it's sweet and sours. Chu Qingyan did not forget to give it a little advertisement. It looks pretty good. Xiangyu, buy it for this prince. Xiao Ran immediately said to the servant beside him.
Yes.
Xiangyu immediately went to carry out the order. After a while, Chu Qingyan turned her head to look at Xiangyu, who was carrying the Tonghulu skewers. She then looked at Xiao Ran, who was holding the Tonghulu skewers in his left hand and right hand. She suddenly felt like Granny Lu entering the Grand View Garden. Xiao Ran saw that she was looking at him and ordered Xiangyu, pull one out and give it to Qingyan to eat.
Yes.
Xiangyu pulled one out from the straw skewers on her shoulder and handed it to Chu Qingyan. Chu Qingyan looked at the Tonghulu skewers in her hand and then looked at the strange gazes everyone was giving her. She suddenly felt like she couldn't eat anymore. She really was drunk. How was she supposed to go shopping while carrying such a large Tonghulu skewers? After strolling around the streets for nearly an hour, Huling had already brought people to pick her up. Thus, Xiao Ran reluctantly bid farewell to her with his mouth full of syrup. Chu Qingyan really wanted to pretend she didn't know this person. Wasn't it clearly said that this Xiao Ran was a young genius? Was it something that only appeared once in 100 years? Why was he like this in front of her? Were the rumors wrong? Was this the typical high IQ and low EQ? After waving her hand to send off Xiao Ran, Chu Qingyan and Huling returned to the king's palace. On the way back, Huling did not explain why he suddenly disappeared, and she did not ask. Returning to her room, she comforted Xining, who was crying because she couldn't find her. Chu Qingyan thought about her experiences over the past few days. She didn't know what kind of disaster she had attracted recently. Every time she met someone, if they didn't want her to become a nun, they wanted her to become a maidservant. So, she decided that it was best if she didn't go out for the next few days. It was safer for her to be a beautiful woman and stay by the big ice cube's side. At least the cold air coming from the big ice cube's body was enough to make those demons and monsters retreat. However, there were some things that even if she didn't go out to look for them, they would still find her. For example, the sudden imperial edict. Shi Xian Emperor, who had nothing to do, suddenly wanted to see his little daughter-in-law. Chapter 102. After returning to the prince's residence, Chu Qingyan felt a little uneasy. She walked through the corridor and arrived at the study. The door was wide open, and she looked past the decorations to see the figure sitting behind the desk. She felt as if she had found someone to rely on and immediately walked towards him. Xiao Su heard her footsteps, but did not look up as he asked, "Did you get lost?" Chu Qingyan stopped in her tracks, and her expression was a little unnatural. This big ice cube is really annoying. His ability to tease people is really getting better with each passing day. "I'm not lost. I was just careless." Chu Qingyan thought for a long time, but did not know how to continue. Xiao Su smoothly helped her finish the sentence. "You were careless and lost all your servants? You really are capable." Chu Qingyan smiled embarrassedly and then walked to his side. She stretched her head to look at the book in his hand. It was a military book. She pursed her lips. "You always wake up early to go to court and come back to read and write. Don't you feel bored?" Xiao Su raised his eyebrows and looked at her. "That's how it feels in your eyes." Chu Qingyan ignored his teasing and leisurely wandered around the study. "Come here," Xiao Su suddenly said. "What is it?" Although Chu Qingyan asked, her body still walked over of its own accord. "Pick one for yourself." Xiao Su looked at the stack of books on the table. Chu Qingyan did not know what he meant, but she still casually picked a book from the stack of books on the table. The 3-character classic? She looked at the other books. Rules for Disciples, The Analects of Confucius, Mencius. What for? Chu Qingyan asked in confusion as she waved the book in her hand in front of him. "Take a good look." Xiao Su saw that she had nothing to do all day and was afraid that she would not be able to accomplish anything if she continued like this. Because the books on his bookshelf were too profound, he was afraid that she would not be able to understand them. Thus, he had people search for suitable reading materials for children for her to read. "You want me to learn this?" Chu Qingyan found it hard to believe. "You have a problem with that?" Xiao Su asked. Chu Qingyan didn't dare to say anything after receiving his coercion. However, she had read the 3-character classic since she was a child. The books on the table didn't give her any pressure at all, okay? But if she reported the truth, would she be treated as a monster by the ice cube? At this time, White Tiger walked in with 2 servants carrying a table and chair. After greeting his lord, White Tiger instructed the servants to set up the table and chair. Chu Qingyan stared dumbfoundedly at the table and chair that were one size smaller than Xiao Su's. She suddenly had a bad premonition. Was it too late for her to slip away now? Xiao Su glanced at her, and she stood at attention. "From now on, you will study and learn how to write here." That one sentence determined her dark days in the future. Chu Qingyan wanted to cry, but no tears came out. She could only accept her fate. She couldn't run up to him and say that she had studied these books in high school. Xiao Su looked at her. She wanted to resist, but she did not dare to say anything. In the end, she just obediently read the book and smiled in satisfaction. At this time, Hualing and Turin walked in. However, when they saw Chu Qingyan sitting on the side, their expressions became a bit strange. "Greetings to Master." "What is it?" Xiao Su looked at his 2 subordinates in front of him while paying attention to her reading. Hualing looked at Chu Qingyan and was a bit hesitant. Xiao Su said indifferently, "It's fine."
Speak.
Seeing that their master did not hide anything from Chu Qingyan, Hualing and Turin looked at each other. In the end, Hualing still took a step forward to report, "Master, I saw black-clothed people on the streets of the eastern part of the city today. This subordinate followed them, and after fighting with them, I discovered their martial arts and the assassins that chased after them. This subordinate believes that these people are in cahoots with the assassins that tried to assassinate the 4th prince. Moreover, this subordinate discovered that these people seem to come from a very hidden sect called the Moon Palace sect. It is also a sect that people in Jianghu talk about. This Moon Palace sect is very good at assassinations and poisons. They are highly respected by the royal families and even officials of various countries. They have always received commissions to take on assassination missions, but the price is very high. It is not something that normal people can afford. Moreover, the palace master of the Moon Palace sect rarely appears in the world. Even now, no one knows where this Moon Palace sect stronghold is. Turin reported all the information he had received. Xiao Su's finger lightly tapped on the pages of the book. Since this Moon Palace sect has always been hidden and has appeared in the capital, they must have other movements. Continue to investigate and report to me if there is any new information. Yes. Turin and Hualing both responded. Xiao Su's gaze fell on Chu Qingyan as he lightly said to Hualing and Turin, if there is nothing else, you can leave. Turin and Hualing simultaneously glanced at Chu Qingyan, who was pretending to be seriously reading, before respectfully leaving. At birth, a man's nature is good. Their natures are similar, but their habits are different. If one does not teach, their nature will change. The way of teaching is to specialize. Hualing and Turin walked out of the study. The two of them were silent. In the end, Hualing spoke first. Turin, do you think that Master cares too much about the little princess consort? You are not blind. Turin glanced at him. Ignoring the mockery in Turin's words, Hualing frowned and said, do you think it is good to continue like this? Turin looked at the sky. There were many white clouds. When a gust of wind blew, they began to float. No one knew where the clouds would drift to. I also do not know. If Master does not want that position, then it is fine. I am just worried that if Master ascends to that position in the future, she will not be able to help him at all. Turin said faintly, Big Ice Cube, I am hungry. Can I go eat dessert? You have only read a few pages.
Continue.
The people in the room started talking one after another. Turin and Hualing had complicated expressions. But now that she is here, Master seems to be more humane. He no longer doesn't care about anything. Hualing said softly. Turin was silent. At this moment, White Tiger hurriedly walked towards the study. Is Lord in the studies? White Tiger asked the two of them.
Yes.
Housekeeper, is there something urgent? Hualing replied. Someone from the palace is here. White Tiger knocked on the study door after speaking, and went in to report. Chu Qingyan was still desperately reading. She knew that the Big Ice Cube had gone out. When he came back, he told her to go back to her room to change clothes and prepare to enter the palace with him. Enter the palace? Chu Qingyan thought she heard wrong. Do you have a problem? Xiao Su gave her a cold look. Chu Qingyan suddenly had the impulse to beat her chest and stomp her feet. Wasn't everything fine? Why did she suddenly have to enter the palace? I suddenly got an illness that prevents me from entering the palace. Chu Qingyan grabbed the corner of the table and said pitifully, I will give you 15 minutes. Xiao Su ignored her cries and left her with this last sentence before stepping out of the room. The Big Ice Cube was so cold-blooded. She really did not want to enter the palace. She subconsciously rejected it, but she still had to enter the palace. Chapter 103. Chu Qingyan looked up at the sky and let out a long sigh. She could only resign herself to her fate and change her clothes. Why did the Sichuan Emperor not summon them earlier or later, but now of all times? Chu Qingyan looked at the sky. Could it be that he wanted to invite her and the Big Ice Cube to dinner? With this thought in mind, she changed her clothes and got on the carriage to enter the palace. Big Ice Cube, do you think His Majesty summoned us for something? Chu Qingyan couldn't hold back her curiosity and raised her head to ask the person who was resting with his eyes closed. Xiao Su calmly replied, This prince isn't sure either. Big Ice Cube, then tell me, what kind of person is your imperial father? Is he easy to get along with? What should I say and what shouldn't I say when I go? Chu Qingyan suddenly felt nervous. She realized that she was about to meet the person who held the highest authority in the Xixian nation, the person who held absolute power over her life and death. Emperors only existed in history books and on television screens. She had never thought that she would have the chance to meet a living person like this one day. However, Chu Qingyan, who was immersed in her own emotions, didn't notice that Xiao Su's expression changed slightly after she asked, What kind of person? In reality, he didn't know either. After he turned 10, his impression of his imperial father had become fainter and fainter. Whether his imperial father had ever praised him, affirmed him, or shown him a smile, he had already forgotten all of it. Or rather, he didn't have the heart to remember it, and it was subsequently forgotten in the depths of his memory. It wasn't until the young girl in front of him blinked her large eyes that he pulled himself out of his thoughts. The less you say, the less you make mistakes. It's good that you don't do anything. Chu Qingyan was stunned. Was this how the big ice cube handled things? But when she stared at Xiao Su, she discovered a different kind of emotion surging in his eyes. It wasn't as cold as usual, and there was a hint of melancholy. Her heart couldn't help but clench. She moved closer and carefully asked, "Big ice cube, what's wrong? Did I say something wrong?" Xiao Su lowered his head and looked into her eyes. They were clean and clear like a curved stream, so clear that he could see the bottom. The strange grief in his heart slowly dissipated in her stream. He raised his hand and stroked her head, sighing softly. "So, the less you say, the less mistakes you make." Tisk. Chu Qingyan immediately turned her face away. Big Ice Cube must be teasing her. Xiao Su curled his lips, and his mood improved for no reason. However, this girl seemed to be becoming more and more open with him. Was this a good thing or a bad thing? Xiao Su was a little puzzled. At this time, the carriage suddenly stopped moving forward. Chu Qingyan immediately looked at Xiao Su. Gui's voice came from outside the carriage. "Lord, it's the second prince." "The second prince? Xiao Yao? That dissolute and unrestrained prince?" Chu Qingyan's mind instantly flashed with the image of a dispirited man with green eyes who indulged in sensual pleasures. It was said that this second prince did not love his country, but loved beauties. Therefore, Chu Qingyan was very curious about this second prince who was rumored to be excessively licentious. "Amen," Xiao Su calmly replied. Thus, the carriage's curtains were pulled up from the outside. Chu Qingyan sat inside the carriage and opened her eyes wide to look around. She wanted to see this famous second prince. "I say, eldest brother, you're really not a good friend. You've been back for so long. I asked you to come to my residence for a visit, but you refused. You've really made this subject, brother, very sad." Before Chu Qingyan could see anyone, she heard a leisurely and casual voice coming from the side of the carriage. Just by listening to this voice, it was clear and bright but also free and easy. It was hard to associate this voice with the rumored licentious second prince. As soon as the voice fell, the person riding the horse also arrived in front of the carriage. The person was dressed in a green robe, his black hair held up high by a golden hairpin. The front of his robe was slightly open, revealing his exquisite collarbone. He was leaning against the back of the horse with a relaxed expression. Only when he looked at Xiao Su did he become alert. What a dissolute and unrestrained man. "The smell in your residence isn't good." Xiao Su did not give him any face, and directly replied. Xiao Yao was stunned at first, but then he understood the meaning behind his words. He couldn't help but laugh loudly. "Eldest brother, what's wrong with the smell of those rouge powders? They're soft and tender and alluring, with cherry lips and willow waists. They're fat and thin. They have a unique taste." Speaking up to here, Xiao Yao seemed to have thought of something and smiled at him. "That's right. Eldest brother has never liked those vulgar powders. How about this subject, brother? Wait for the next time I come across a peerless beauty and invite the eldest brother to my residence for a chat." Xiao Su coldly looked at him. "Just mind your own business. Ben Wang doesn't need it." Chu Qingyan looked in disbelief at the person in front of her. He could actually say such things in front of so many people. It really was, as the rumor said, indulging in sensual pleasures. But it was a pity that such a good body was wasted. But Chu Qingyan looked at this person. Even though his words were full of laughter, his eyes were very bright. She faintly felt that this person was not as he appeared on the surface. "Eldest brother really hasn't changed at all," Xiao Yao said uninterestedly. Then he thought of something and poked his head into the carriage to look. "Right, I heard that you are very fond of that little princess. Have her come out for me to see if she's a feast for the eyes. Xiao Su raised his eyes to look at him. Stop before you go too far. Xiao Yao suddenly shivered. Eldest brother's eyes seemed to have frozen. It really was frightening. He did not go any further. He stroked the horse's mane with one hand, his expression still mischievous. I heard that today, that person mentioned your little princess in Fu Huang's ears, so Fu Huang had a sudden impulse to bring you to see her. Xiao Su did not respond, but it was clear that he had heard it. All right, the night of spring is short. Chen Di still has to go see the beauties. I wish you a safe journey. Xiao Yao leisurely waved his hand at them. Then he raised his whip and leisurely led his attendants away. Who was that person? Why did Xiao Yao not point it out? Why did he wish them a safe journey when they were just going into the palace? Also, his seemingly casual words were not really casual. Chu Qingyan did not know what Xiao Yao's words meant, but there seemed to be a hidden meaning. Because she saw that after the big ice block heard those words, he became silent. Chu Qingyan tugged at his sleeve, wanting to ask him about it. It's fine. Xiao Su patted the back of her hand and then ordered the carriage to continue forward. The curtain of the carriage fell and covered the light of the setting sun. Chu Qingyan looked thoughtfully at the person in front of her and then suddenly spoke. After I enter the palace, I will definitely listen to you. If no one asks, I will not speak. I will be careful and will not cause trouble for you. Xiao Su heard this and looked at her. He saw the seriousness on her little face and knew that she had guessed something from Xiao Yao's words. He suddenly smiled and raised a hand to touch her face. No need. If there's a problem, Ben Wang will take care of it. His fingers were slightly rough as they caressed her cheeks. He quickly withdrew his hand, but the gentleness didn't immediately disappear from her cheeks. Only then did she realize that she seemed to have been taken advantage of just now. And it was the big ice block. It really was too surprising. But when the big ice block smiled, his eyes were very beautiful. It was a pity that his face was covered by the mask and she could not see his face. She was not happy. Chapter 104. After another quarter of an hour, they arrived at the palace gates. Chu Qingyan got off the carriage and looked at the towering palace walls. She couldn't help but sigh at Big Ice Cube. This was the first time she had seen such a tall wall in her life. Xiao Su's face darkened when he heard this. He grabbed her collar and walked into the palace. Chu Qingyan didn't know that his face would change so quickly. She must have been seeing things when he was so gentle in the carriage just now. After entering the palace, there was a wide road paved with green bricks. Along the way, there were guards every 5 steps and a small imperial guard every 10 steps. There were no flowers or trees, only cold armor. Chu Qingyan looked at the heavily guarded palace and sighed inwardly. As expected, this was the most important place in the country. Even a fly couldn't get in. But she quickly looked away and warned herself that from the moment she entered the palace gates, she had to be careful with her words and actions. Therefore, she couldn't look around right now. Big Ice Cube's status in the imperial family was already a bit delicate. Now, she couldn't bring trouble to him. After passing through a place that looked like a square and passing through a corridor, there was a eunuch waiting there to lead the way. Greetings to His Royal Highness. An old eunuch without a beard bowed to Xiao Su. Looking at his attire, he should be a eunuch with some status in the palace. Eunuch Xiao, sorry to trouble you to wait, Xiao Su said lightly. I don't dare. Eunuch Xiao turned to look at Chu Qingyan with a smile and then asked, This is the 9th young miss of a Chu family? She's so smart and cute. Originally, he wanted to say that he and Prince Ing were a match made in heaven, but looking at their height and age, no matter how eloquent he was, he didn't dare to say it out loud. Xiao Su said to Chu Qingyan, This is Imperial Father's favorite, Eunuch Xiao. Chu Qingyan obediently bowed. Hello, Eunuch Xiao. This servant doesn't deserve such praise. Eunuch Xiao hurriedly avoided Chu Qingyan's bow. He originally thought that since Chu Qingyan was only a 10-year-old child from the countryside, her words and actions would not be presentable. However, when he saw her standing beside the King of England, looking straight ahead with a slight and well-behaved smile on her face, if he did not know the inside story, he would have thought that she was a young lady from an aristocratic family. However, he had to admit that this Chu Qingyan's appearance was outstanding. At least among these aristocratic families, she could be said to be one of the best. Let's go. Xiao Su didn't like small talk, so he said coldly, "This servant is confused. His Majesty should be anxious from waiting. Please follow this servant." Eunuch Xiao bowed and raised his hand to point in the direction. Xiao Su then led Chu Qingyan forward in large strides. The vermilion pillars of the palace seemed to extend forward without end, passing through the walkway. They turned and walked onto the white arch bridge. What entered their sight was a long corridor built on the surface of the water. Rippling waves of the lake surrounded the bottom. Fields of lotus leaves, either in clusters or in large patches, made the entire lake exuberant because of the greenery. From afar, they could see the palace hidden in the green leaves. The corridors were winding, the eaves were high, each hugging the terrain and fighting against each other. Chu Qingyan felt a kind of oppressive atmosphere and sternness coming towards her. It wasn't until they stopped in front of the main hall that Eunuch Xiao bowed and said, "Masters, please wait a moment. This servant will go and report." Xiao Su nodded slightly. After Eunuch Xiao left, Chu Qingyan finally dared to size up the surrounding buildings. Dignified halls rose and fell one after another, closely intertwined like fish scales. And the high hall in front of her seemed to be the core of all the halls. It was clustered around, and the glittering golden glazed tiles all revealed its nobility and majesty. Imperial Study. The 3 large words were written in thick ink on a red plaque with golden patterns on the edges. It was noble and dignified. And under each pillar, there was an imperial guard with a blade standing there expressionlessly. The security was very tight. After a while, Eunuch Xiao came out. However, Chu Qingyan noticed that his expression was unnatural. She couldn't help but be curious. Could it be that the Sichuan emperor didn't want to see them? Reporting to His Royal Highness, His Majesty is currently testing the 4th prince's homework. Please wait here for a moment. Eunuch Xiao revealed a troubled expression. "It's fine. We'll wait." Xiao Su didn't seem to care at all. Eunuch Xiao bowed to them and entered the palace. This wait lasted for an hour. The sky was getting dark, and the afterglow of the setting sun was about to cover the mountaintop. At this time, Chu Qingyan began to feel a little strange. Xiao Su was the first prince and the eldest son of the first wife. He should be treated well. Why did he have to wait outside the palace after hearing the order to rush over? Big ice block, how long do we have to wait? Chu Qingyan raised her head and asked. Xiao Su lowered his head and said indifferently, "Tired of waiting? No, I just don't know how long we have to wait." Waiting was sometimes a kind of enjoyment, but waiting for an unknown amount of time was something that would end. Moreover, she had to continue waiting. It was inevitable that her heart would feel a little hopeless. Seeing her rubbing her hands, Xiao Su asked in a rare attentive manner, "Are you cold?" "No." "Achoo." Chu Qingyan nodded with an embarrassed smile. Actually, she didn't want to admit it, but she didn't know that her body was so honest. Although it was midsummer, the wind in the palace was colder than outside. She didn't know if it was proof, but the palaces of each dynasty were built on yellow earth and white bones. Those unwilling souls would occasionally blow the eerie wind in any corner of the palace. Xiao Su saw that she didn't mean what she said. He couldn't help but laugh and reached out to hold her small hand. Chu Qingyan didn't know what he wanted to do. His body temperature was clearly lower than hers. Could it be that he wanted to use poison to fight poison, to use ice to cure ice? Chu Qingyan was amused by the random thoughts in her mind. It was also at this time that a warm current flowed from her palm into her blood. It then circulated throughout her body, warming up her veins and making her entire body feel warm. Chu Qingyan felt like she was soaking in a hot spring. She was like a satisfied kitten. She narrowed her eyes and sighed as she asked, "Is this internal strength? It can kill enemies and keep out the cold?" Emotions were contagious, especially when the small hand in his palm was tightly holding onto his fingers, as if he was her support. Xiao Su's voice also became gentle. "Big ice cube, teach me in the future." Chu Qingyan felt that if she knew martial arts, she would be able to protect herself in the future. Moreover, she would be able to keep warm. Xiao Su seemed to have seen through her thoughts and poured cold water on her. "If you can wake up at 3 in the morning, train for at least 6 hours a day, and persevere through the harsh winter and scorching summer, then this prince will consider teaching you." 3 in the morning? Converted to modern time, wouldn't that mean waking up at 4 or 5 in the morning? Training for at least 6 hours a day? Once she thought of being exposed to the scorching sun during the summer and her hands freezing in the cold wind during the winter, she immediately shook her head like a rattle drum. Xiao Su already knew that she would have this reaction. She was used to being a lazy cat. She would even cry when asked to read a book, so how could she suddenly become diligent? 3 feet of ice was not formed in a single day. If you want to learn, you have to persevere. As for you, in this king's opinion, it will be very difficult. Chu Qingyan puffed up her cheeks. She really wanted to nod and agree that she could do it. But once she thought of the consequences of being impulsive, she immediately stopped that thought. If she spoke too fast, the one who would suffer in the end would be herself. Xiao Su saw that she reacted and couldn't help feeling that it was a pity. He wanted to stimulate her. If she could really learn some martial arts, then that would be good. "Big ice cube, why do you think His Majesty still hasn't summoned us?" It was almost time for dinner. "Impatient?" he asked. "And would you?" she asked. "Used to it," he lightly replied. "Used to it?" Chu Qingyan unconsciously looked at him. Was he used to waiting, or was he used to being left out like this? Was it because this kind of thing happened too often, so he was used to it? Chu Qingyan didn't know why, but a corner of her heart ached. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.